You are nothing but a glorified baker. My sister screamed the words so loudly that the string quartet in the adjacent ballroom stopped playing entirely. Her diamond necklace caught the chandelier light as she shook with rage, pointing a manicured finger at my stained apron. But the billionaire she was about to marry did not even look at her. He walked right past her performative tears, his eyes locked straight on me. He stared directly at the twisted burn scars covering my forearms and whispered that he had been searching for me for 6 months. My entire family went pale. They thought I was just the hired help ruining their perfect aesthetic. They had no idea I was the woman who pulled him from a burning vehicle the night he vanished. My name is Maya. I am 35 years old, and I am still learning how to stop setting myself on fire to keep my toxic family warm. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family and had to fight to reclaim your worth. The air inside the catering kitchen of the Buckhead Country Club was thick enough to choke on. The industrial ovens blasted heat against my spine, while the suffocating smell of roasting thyme and melting butter coated the back of my throat. I wiped a heavy bead of sweat from my forehead, using the back of my wrist, being incredibly careful not to smudge the pristine white chef coat I had ironed at 4 a.m. I was absolutely exhausted. My feet ached with a dull, throbbing pain from standing on the hard ceramic tile for 14 hours straight, but I could not stop moving. There were 300 elite guests out in the grand ballroom, waiting for their dessert courses, and I was running the line completely alone. I was not being paid a single dime for this monumental effort. My mother Loretta had made that explicitly clear when she cornered me 2 weeks ago. She told me that catering Jada's engagement party was my fundamental duty as a sister. She insisted that Jada needed this night to be absolutely flawless to secure her permanent place in Atlanta high society. According to my mother, since my independent pastry business was nothing more than a cute hobby, the absolute least I could do was offer my professional services as a wedding gift. It was a vicious lie, of course. My business was thriving, but my mother could never stand to acknowledge my independent success. To her, Jada was the ultimate golden child, the beautiful socialite daughter who had finally hooked a billionaire. I was just the workhorse expected to stay hidden in the background, making sure the golden child looked perfect. I was in the middle of pulling a massive copper pot of boiling caramel off the stove when the heavy kitchen doors swung violently open. Chloe marched in. She was my brother Trey's wife, a woman who loved to post about social justice on the internet, but treated every service worker she ever met like absolute garbage. Today she was wearing a pale silk gown that cost more than my first car, and a dark scowl that ruined her expensive professional makeup. She clicked her designer heels across the greasy floor and snapped her fingers right in front of my face. "Maya, I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now," she commanded. Chloe crossed her thin arms and glared at the trays of carefully spun sugar baskets I had spent the last 3 hours meticulously crafting. Jada just realized that 3 of her most important bridesmaids are on a strict raw vegan cleanse. We need 24 raw vegan tartlets, sent out to the VIP tables immediately. I kept my eyes entirely focused on the boiling caramel, carefully whisking it so the delicate sugar would not burn and ruin the entire batch. "Chloe, I am in the middle of plating the main dessert course for 300 people. A specialized vegan option was supposed to be requested 3 days ago. I do not have raw vegan ingredients prepped anywhere in this kitchen, and I cannot stop a massive service to start chopping cashews from scratch." Chloe scoffed loudly. She stepped closer, invading my limited workspace. Her voice dripped with the exact kind of condescension that made my blood boil hotter than the sugar on the stove. "This is exactly why your mother is always apologizing for you, Maya. You have zero vision and zero flexibility. Jada is out there securing a financial legacy for this entire family, and you cannot even accommodate a simple dietary request. Stop being so stubborn, do your job, and make the tarts." I turned to face her, gripping the heavy metal whisk tightly in my hand. "I am doing my job, Chloe. I am doing the incredibly difficult job that nobody is paying me for. Now please step back from the stove. This caramel is dangerously hot, and you are standing directly in the active prep zone. Instead of stepping back, Chloe let out an exaggerated sigh of sheer frustration. She rolled her eyes and turned around dramatically to storm out of the kitchen, but as she spun, her heavy designer purse swung outward with immense force. The thick brass buckle caught the edge of the tall aluminum rolling rack positioned right beside my station. The tall rack wobbled violently. I saw the entire disaster unfolding in slow motion. The heavy metal structure tilted forward, falling directly toward my junior prep cook, a 19-year-old girl who was completely oblivious while piping frosting onto cupcakes just a few feet away. I did not have time to think. I just reacted. I lunged forward with all my strength, shoving the young girl hard out of the way just as the heavy metal rack crashed into the front of my stove. The violent impact launched the heavy copper pot of boiling caramel straight into the air. A searing, blinding pain ripped across both of my forearms. The molten sugar splashed directly onto my bare skin, clinging to my flesh like liquid fire. It landed right on top of the old jagged scars I had been desperately hiding under long sleeves for the last 6 months. The pain was so immediate and intense that it knocked the breath completely out of my lungs. I dropped to my knees on the hard floor, clutching my arms as the boiling caramel literally sizzled against my skin. The young prep cook screamed in absolute horror, dropping her pastry bag and covering her mouth. Chloe stopped by the swinging doors and turned around to stare at the chaotic mess. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not rush over to help. She did not even yell for a medic. She simply looked at the ruined caramel pooling on the floor, looked down at me, writhing in pain, and sneered. "Look what you just did, Maya. Now Jada is going to be absolutely furious that the dessert service is running late. Try to clean yourself up before you come out there. You are making an embarrassing scene." With those final words, she pushed through the doors and disappeared back into the elegant party, leaving me kneeling in total agony on the sticky tile floor. I gritted my teeth, closing my eyes tightly, as the fresh, horrific burns throbbed in perfect time with my racing heart. Every instinct in my body wanted to break down. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. I wanted to walk out the back door and never look at any of them again, but I slowly forced myself to stand up. I walked heavily over to the industrial stainless steel sink and turned on the cold water, plunging my ruined, blistering arms underneath the freezing stream. I watched the water turn a faint pink as it washed away the caramel and the blood. I stared at my own reflection in the metal backsplash. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly wrapped my arms in thick layers of sterile gauze, pulled down the sleeves of a fresh chef coat to hide the damage, and grabbed the nearest heavy silver tray of desserts. If my family wanted me to serve them tonight, I was going to serve them. But as I pushed open those kitchen doors and stepped out into the blinding lights of the ballroom, I made a silent promise to myself. I was entirely done being their victim. The era of my silence was over. The heavy double doors of the ballroom swung shut behind me, instantly severing the chaotic noise of the catering kitchen. The air inside the Buckhead Country Club was crisp and aggressively air-conditioned, carrying the overwhelming scent of expensive floral arrangements and imported champagne. I stood for a fraction of a second at the edge of the room, letting my eyes adjust to the blinding glare of the crystal chandeliers. The grand ballroom was a sea of pastel silk-tailored tuxedos and performative laughter. 300 of Atlanta's wealthiest and most influential residents were mingling, completely oblivious to the blood and sweat it took to build the pristine illusion surrounding them. I gripped the edges of the heavy silver tray so tightly my knuckles turned white. On the polished surface sat 36 intricate gold leaf macarons and spun sugar tarts, flawless masterpieces I had crafted by hand. But beneath the crisp white fabric of my chef coat, my forearms were screaming. The thick layers of sterile gauze were already starting to feel tight and damp against my blistered skin. Every single heartbeat sent a fresh, agonizing wave of liquid fire radiating from my wrists up to my elbows. I forced my spine completely straight. I locked my jaw, refusing to let a single ounce of pain register on my face. I was not stepping out here to serve desserts. I was stepping out here to find Chloe. I scanned the crowded room, bypassing the local politicians and the reality television stars my mother had desperately invited to boost our family's social standing. Finally, I spotted her. Chloe was standing near a massive glowing ice sculpture shaped like a pair of swans. She had a flute of champagne in her hand and was throwing her head back in exaggerated laughter at a joke someone had just told. She looked completely unbothered, perfectly content in her expensive gown, as if she had not just permanently scarred another human being and walked away without a backward glance. A cold, unfamiliar rage settled deep in my chest. For 35 years, I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I had let my mother diminish my career. I had let my brother drain our resources. I had let my sister treat me like an embarrassing secret. But the searing pain radiating through my arms was the final boundary. I began walking across the polished marble floor, my eyes locked dead on Chloe. I did not make it more than 20 feet. A manicured hand suddenly clamped down hard onto my right bicep, fingers digging aggressively into the fabric of my coat, dangerously close to the fresh burns. I flinched, biting the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper, as I was violently yanked into the shadowy alcove near the draped velvet curtains. I turned and found myself staring directly into the furious face of my sister. Jada looked like a porcelain doll dipped in diamonds. Her custom silk engagement dress hugged her frame perfectly, and her hair was styled in flawless cascading waves. But the mask of the elegant high society bride was completely gone. Her dark eyes were narrowed into venomous slits, and her lips were curled into a sneer of pure disgust. "What in the world are you doing out here, Maya?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but laced with absolute poison. I looked down at her hand, which was still gripping my arm, and then looked back up into her eyes. "I am serving the dessert course that our mother demanded I provide for free. And I am looking for your sister-in-law who just caused a massive accident in my kitchen." Jada did not ask what happened. She did not ask if I was hurt. She simply dropped her gaze to assess my appearance, taking in the faint pink stains near the hem of my apron and the slightly bulky, unnatural way my sleeves sat over the hidden bandages. Her expression contorted with profound embarrassment. "I do not care about your kitchen drama, Maya. Look at you. You are an absolute mess. I told Mother it was a massive mistake to let you cater this event. You could not even bother to make yourself look presentable for the most important night of my entire life. You look like the hired help." "I am the hired help, Jada." I stated the fact evenly, my voice dangerously calm. "The only difference is that actual hired help gets paid. I have been on my feet for 14 hours ensuring your high society friends have a menu they can brag about. But 10 minutes ago, Chloe walked into my prep zone, threw a tantrum over vegan tartlets, and knocked a pot of boiling caramel directly onto my arms." Jada's eyes flashed, but not with concern. She was entirely inconvenienced by my reality. "Then go to the hospital and leave quietly through the loading dock. Do not parade yourself through my ballroom looking for an apology. Do you have any idea who is in this room right now? Julian's entire executive board is here. The mayor is here. My future mother-in-law is watching my family like a hawk, waiting for us to prove we do not belong in their tax bracket. And you are out here smelling like burnt sugar and sweat trying to start a public fight with Chloe." I held the silver tray steady, feeling the agonizing throb of my pulse against the burns. "You are standing here worried about your tax bracket while the skin on my arms is peeling off. I am going to walk over there, and I am going to hold Chloe accountable. If that shatters your perfect illusion, that is not my problem." I took a step forward, intending to bypass her. Jada sidestepped, physically blocking my path. Her breathing turned shallow and erratic. The fragile ego she had built her entire life upon was entirely dependent on controlling every narrative, and she was losing control of me. "You are not taking another step," she commanded, her voice trembling with rising hysteria. "You are doing this on purpose. You have always done this. You could not stand the fact that Mother chose me to carry the family legacy. You could not stand the fact that I am the one marrying a billionaire, while you are stuck in a hot room covered in flour." I stared at her, genuinely pitying the empty shell of a woman standing in front of me. "I built a business with my own two hands, Jada. You are marrying a bank account because you have no idea how to survive on your own. Do not project your profound insecurities onto me. Move out of my way. That was the breaking point. The desperate, ugly truth I had just spoken completely shattered Jada's carefully constructed facade. All the resentment, the manufactured superiority, and the deep-seated fear that she was a fraud boiled over in a single uncontrollable instant. She forgot about the mayor. She forgot about the executives. She forgot about the illusion. Jada threw her hands up and screamed. She did not just yell. She unleashed a piercing, hysterical shriek that echoed off the vaulted ceilings and cut through the ballroom like a heavy blade. You are nothing but a glorified baker. The lively chatter in the room instantly died. Heads snapped in our direction. The string quartet in the corner faltered, the cellist hitting a discordant note before the music stopped entirely. 300 pairs of eyes locked onto the alcove where we stood. But Jada was too far gone to care. Tears of profound toxic anger streamed down her flawless makeup as she pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my chest. You have always been jealous of me, she screamed, her voice echoing in the dead silence of the country club. You are trying to ruin my life because you have nothing. You are just a baker. You are jealous and you are ugly. The silence that followed her outburst was absolute and suffocating. The elite guests stared in breathless shock, champagne glasses frozen halfway to their mouths. My mother, standing across the room near the ice sculpture, looked as though the floor had just dropped out from beneath her. Chloe stood frozen, her eyes wide with panic. I did not flinch. I did not drop the tray. I just stood there wearing my stained chef coat and my agonizing burns, looking directly into my sister's weeping, furious eyes. I had nothing to be ashamed of. Then the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps broke the silence. From the center of the ballroom, Jada's billionaire fiancé separated himself from the crowd. Julian did not look embarrassed by his bride's spectacular meltdown. He did not rush over to comfort her. He walked purposefully across the marble floor, his expression unreadable, his eyes completely ignoring the woman he was supposed to marry in 3 months. He walked straight past Jada's outstretched, trembling hand. He stopped directly in front of me. Julian stood 6'2", radiating a quiet authority that instantly dwarfed the chaotic energy Jada had just unleashed. He did not look at my stained apron. He did not look at the messy hair clinging to my sweaty forehead. His dark, intense eyes dropped immediately to my arms. The sleeves of my chef coat had been pushed up during the struggle with my sister, exposing the fresh, agonizing burns from the caramel. But beneath the angry red blisters, the thick, jagged keloid scars from 6 months ago were clearly visible under the chandelier light. I watched his expression shift entirely. The polite indifference of a billionaire attending a high society function vanished in a fraction of a second. It was replaced by a sharp, unmistakable shock of pure recognition. He reached out slowly. He did not touch me, but his hand hovered over the twisted skin of my right forearm. I know those scars, Julian said. His voice was low and steady, but in the dead silence of the ballroom it carried like a gunshot. Jada let out a strangled gasp. Julian, what are you doing? She asked, stepping forward and desperately trying to insert herself between us. Get away from her, she is unstable. Julian did not even blink at his fiancée. He kept his eyes locked firmly on mine. The air between us seemed to crackle with an unspoken, heavy understanding. 6 months ago, on a desolate stretch of highway just outside the Atlanta city limits, a luxury sports car had hydroplaned, flipped 3 times, and burst into flames. I was driving home from a double shift at the bakery. I was the only person on that dark road. I did not wait for the fire department to arrive. I used my bare hands and a heavy tire iron to pry the crushed door open, pulling the unconscious driver from the burning wreckage mere seconds before the gas tank exploded. The intense heat had permanently scarred my arms. I had left the scene the moment I heard the ambulance sirens approaching, leaving behind only the heavy gold Rolex I had pulled off his wrist to check his pulse. I never told my family about the crash. I had hidden the scars under long sleeves for half a year, but somehow Jada had found that Rolex in my apartment. She had stolen it. And looking at Julian's face right now, I suddenly realized the horrifying depth of my sister's deception. She had not just stolen the watch. She had stolen my story. She had presented herself to this billionaire as his brave savior. "I have been looking for you for 6 months," Julian whispered, his eyes finally rising from my scars to meet my gaze. The truth was right there on the tip of my tongue. I opened my mouth to expose Jada, to tell Julian exactly who had pulled him from the wreckage, to destroy the fragile, fraudulent foundation of this entire wedding. But before a single syllable could leave my lips, a sharp, commanding voice sliced through the tension. "Security! We need security over here immediately." It was my mother. Loretta marched across the polished marble floor with the absolute authority of a general commanding a battlefield. She did not look panicked. She looked utterly calculated. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the floor as two massive, broad-shouldered country club security guards rushed over from the main entrance. "I am so incredibly sorry for this disruption, everyone," my mother announced. She projected her voice flawlessly, ensuring that every single politician, executive, and socialite in the room could hear her perfectly. Her face was a masterclass in tragic maternal concern. She placed a comforting hand on Jada's trembling shoulder while looking at me with profound manufactured pity. "Mother, what are you doing?" I demanded, taking a step backward as the security guards closed in. Loretta ignored my question completely. She turned to Julian, offering him a sad, apologetic smile. "Julian, please forgive my eldest daughter. Maya has been suffering from a severe psychological breakdown for the past year. She experiences violent delusions. We tried to keep her involved in the family business tonight to give her a sense of purpose, but clearly, the stress was too much for her fragile mental state." "That is a complete lie," I stated firmly, looking straight at Julian. "She is lying to you. They are all lying to you." Loretta simply sighed, a sound so dripping with fake sorrow it made my stomach turn. She reached into her expensive leather clutch and pulled out a folded piece of official-looking medical stationery. She unfolded it just enough for the security guards and the guests in the immediate vicinity to see the prominent hospital letterhead. "I have her emergency psychiatric hold paperwork right here," my mother said softly, handing the forged document to the head security guard. "We have been trying to get her committed for her own safety, but she refused her medication. She is entirely detached from reality. She just attacked her sister-in-law in the kitchen and burned herself in a manic episode. Please, officers, she is a danger to herself and others. You need to remove her from the premises immediately before she hurts someone else." The head security guard glanced at the official-looking paper, then looked at my wild, messy appearance, my stained chef coat, and the angry burns covering my arms. The visual contrast between me and the perfectly manicured elite standing around me sealed my fate. He nodded at his partner. "Ma'am, you need to come with us right now," the guard said, stepping forward to grab me. "Do not touch me," I warned, backing away. "I am perfectly sane, and I am leaving on my own." But the guards did not listen. They lunged forward, grabbing me roughly by the upper arms. The heavy grip of the guard on my right side clamped down directly onto the fresh, agonizing caramel burns. A sharp gasp of pure pain escaped my lips, but I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek to stop myself from screaming. I knew that fighting back or crying out would only validate my mother's vicious lie. It would only make me look exactly like the crazy, hysterical woman she had just painted me to be. I stopped resisting. I stood perfectly still, letting the guards hold me. I looked past them, locking eyes with my mother. Loretta stared back at me, her expression entirely devoid of maternal love. It was the cold, ruthless look of a woman who would destroy her own flesh and blood to protect her social standing. Beside her, Jada was hiding her face behind her hands, pretending to weep while secretly peeking through her fingers to watch my humiliation. They were throwing me away. After years of paying their bills, catering their events, and swallowing their abuse, they were discarding me the moment I threatened their perfect illusion. "Take her out through the service elevator," Loretta instructed the guards softly. "Do not let her make another scene in the lobby." As the guards began to drag me backward, I looked at Julian one last time. He had not moved. He was staring at my mother with a hard, calculated expression, his jaw clenched tight. He did not step in to stop them. He did not say another word. But as I was pulled through the heavy velvet curtains and forced toward the service corridor, I saw him take a deliberate step away from Jada. The heavy doors slammed shut behind me, plunging me back into the dim, harsh fluorescent lighting of the staff hallway. The classical music from the ballroom was completely muffled, replaced by the humming of industrial refrigerators. I was shoved roughly toward the loading dock by the security guards, my arms burning, my pride bruised, but my mind strangely clear. My family had just played their final hand. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought they had permanently silenced me. But as the cold Atlanta night air hit my face when the loading dock doors opened, I did not feel defeated. I felt entirely free. The heavy chains of familial obligation were completely broken. My mother and sister had just declared war on a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose, and they had absolutely no idea who they were actually fighting. The concrete walls of the downtown Atlanta precinct holding cell were freezing against my back. The country club security guards had handed me over to the police, citing my mother's forged psychiatric documents and claiming I was a violent threat to myself and others. I sat alone on the rigid metal bench, listening to the hollow echo of footsteps in the corridor. My arms throbbed endlessly. The crude gauze bandages I had applied in the kitchen were now stiff and stained. I had firmly refused the booking officer's offers to call a paramedic. I knew that the moment I entered a hospital under an active psychiatric hold, my mother would have the legal leverage to trap me in a ward and take total control over my life. I had to remain entirely lucid and unbothered. I was quietly calculating my next move when the heavy steel door of the holding cell loudly clicked and swung open. I expected to see a court-appointed psychiatrist holding a clipboard, or perhaps my brother Trey coming to gloat. Instead, Julian stepped into the dim fluorescent light of the cell. He had removed his formal tuxedo jacket and loosened his bow tie, but his physical presence was just as commanding as it had been in the center of the grand ballroom. A tired-looking police officer stood behind him, holding my personal belongings in a clear plastic bag. "Unlock the door and leave us alone," Julian instructed the officer. His voice was calm, but it carried an undeniable authority that made the officer immediately comply. The metal gate slid open and the officer hurried away, leaving the billionaire standing just a few feet away from me. Julian looked at the harsh conditions of the cell, then locked his intense dark eyes on me. "I paid your bail," he said quietly. "I also had my legal team wake up a Supreme Court judge 15 minutes ago. They completely dismantled your mother's forged psychiatric hold. You are free to walk out of here right now." I did not thank him. I slowly stood up from the metal bench, keeping my injured arms carefully tucked close to my chest. I stared back at him with absolute defiance. "I did not ask for your help, Julian. And I certainly do not need your pity. Why are you standing in a police precinct at 2 in the morning instead of consoling your weeping bride?" Julian closed the distance between us, stepping squarely into my personal space. The scent of expensive cologne and the faint smell of the cold night air surrounded him. He was not looking at me with pity. He was looking at me like a man who had just realized his entire life was built on a massive, terrifying lie. I woke up in a hospital bed 6 months ago with a fractured skull and smoke in my lungs. Julian began, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "The doctors told me that my car had flipped 3 times and burst into flames. They told me that if someone had not pried the passenger door open and pulled me out, I would have burned alive." When I finally regained consciousness, Jada was sitting in the chair next to my bed. She was holding the gold Rolex my grandfather gave me. She told me she had been driving behind me on the highway. She looked me in the eye and swore she was the one who dragged me out of the fire. He paused, his gaze dropping to the bloody bandages wrapped around my forearms. But tonight, Julian continued, his voice dropping to a heavy whisper. "I saw your arms. I saw the jagged, twisted tissue wrapping around your wrists. Jada does not have a single scratch on her body. I know the exact pattern of those burn scars, Maya. I spent weeks staring at the charred metal of my ruined car. I know exactly what kind of heat it takes to leave marks like that on human skin." He looked back up into my eyes, searching for a confession. "How did she get my watch, Maya? And why did you leave me there?" I held my head high, refusing to let the exhaustion pull me down. Because I am not a hero looking for a reward, I answered firmly. I pulled you out of that wreckage because it was the right thing to do. Your car was engulfed in flames and the sirens were already approaching. I left because I had a morning shift at my bakery. I had rent to pay and a business to run. I pulled your watch off to check your pulse, and in the chaos, I left it on the kitchen counter at my apartment. My sister found it. She must have seen the news reports, realized who you were, and stolen the watch to orchestrate her perfect introduction. Julian ran a hand over his face, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle ticked in his cheek. He looked thoroughly disgusted with himself. I asked her to marry me because I thought she saved my life. I thought she was brave and selfless. I gave her everything. And all this time, the woman who actually bled for me was being treated like garbage in the background. He reached out as if wanting to comfort me, but I took a sharp step backward. Do not touch me. I warned, my tone sharp and uncompromising. I am not some tragic maiden waiting for a wealthy prince to rescue her. You are supposed to be one of the sharpest, most ruthless businessmen in Atlanta. How did you manage to build a billion-dollar hospitality empire, yet you could not see through the shallowest, most deceitful woman in this entire city? You fell for the illusion, Julian. You wanted the perfect high society trophy wife, and you ignored every single red flag because she looked beautiful on your arm. Julian took the insult without flinching. He knew I was absolutely right. Let me make this right, Maya, he pleaded. My driver is waiting outside. I have the best private doctors in the state ready to treat those burns. Come with me. Let me protect you from them. I grabbed the clear plastic bag containing my phone and my keys from the metal desk. I looked at the billionaire who had the power to change my entire life with a single phone call, and I felt absolutely nothing but a fierce, burning need to rely on myself. I do not want your protection, Julian, I told him, stepping past him toward the open cell door. My family tried to break me tonight, but all they did was set me free. I built my life with my own two hands, and I will fix this disaster with my own two hands. You do not owe me anything for the crash, and I will not be your charity case tonight. Go back to your fake fiancé and figure out your own miserable life. Do not follow me. Without waiting for his response, I walked out of the holding cell. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the police precinct and stepped out into the freezing Atlanta morning. The city was quiet, the streetlights reflecting off the damp pavement. I was entirely alone, injured and exhausted. But as I took a deep breath of the cold air, I smiled. I was ready to take back my empire. The ride from the downtown precinct to the bakery cost me $34, which was nearly half of the cash I had in my pocket. I watched the Atlanta skyline slowly turn a bruised shade of purple as the sun began to rise. My arms throbbed in perfect rhythm with the engine of the car, but my mind was laser-focused. I just needed to get into my kitchen. I needed the familiar smell of vanilla and yeast. I needed to tie on a clean apron and start prepping the morning pastry dough. Loretta's Patisserie was the one thing in my life that actually made sense. I had spent 7 years turning that rundown storefront into one of the most profitable luxury bakeries in the city. The rideshare dropped me off at the corner of Peachtree Street. The neighborhood was still quiet, the streetlights buzzing softly in the morning mist. But as I walked up to the familiar green awning of my bakery, I stopped dead in my tracks. A white commercial van was parked illegally onto the curb. A man in a gray uniform was just packing a heavy tool bag and walking away from the front door. Standing directly under the awning, clutching 2 steaming cups of expensive artisan coffee, were my brother Trey and his wife Chloe. Chloe had changed out of her ruined silk gown from the country club and was now wearing matching designer workout clothes, looking incredibly refreshed for a woman who had just committed aggravated assault in a commercial kitchen. Trey was wearing his signature Silicon Valley tech bro uniform, a fleece vest over a crisp button-down shirt. He was jingling a brand new set of brass keys in his hand. I marched up the sidewalk, the cold morning air stinging my face. What exactly is going on here? I demanded, my voice raspy but firm. Trey jumped slightly, nearly spilling his coffee. He looked at my bandaged arms and stained chef coat, his eyes darting nervously down the street, as if he expected the police to be following me. Maya. He cleared his throat, trying to quickly assemble his fake executive persona. "We did not expect you to be out of the hospital so soon. Mother said you were placed under a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric hold." "Mother is a liar and you know it," I snapped, stepping onto the welcome mat that I had personally scrubbed clean yesterday morning. "Why was there a locksmith at my front door tray?" Chloe took a slow sip of her latte, looking me up and down with absolute disdain. "It is not your front door, sweetie." She said the word sweetie like it was a contagious disease. "It is your mother's building." And as of midnight last night, she legally transferred the commercial lease over to Trey's company. I stared at them, the reality of the betrayal hitting me like a physical blow. "You are changing the locks on my business?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Trey puffed out his chest, stepping in front of the freshly installed deadbolt. "It is not a bakery anymore, Maya. It is a tech incubator now. My startup needs prime commercial real estate to secure the next round of venture capital funding. Our current investors are getting anxious, and I need a physical headquarters to show them I am serious." Mother agreed that family wealth needs to be prioritized for high-yield investments, not selling croissants to tourists. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed down the empty street. "High-yield investments," I repeated, stepping closer to my brother. "You blew through a $600,000 angel investment in 8 months, Trey. You spent $500,000 on luxury office furniture and networking retreats in Aspen, and you still do not have a functional software prototype. You are completely broke. You are drowning in debt, and now you are stealing the only profitable business in this entire family to use as a hollow prop for your next scam." Chloe scoffed loudly, stepping up beside her husband. "You have absolutely no understanding of how modern business works, Maya. Trey is an innovator. He is building generational wealth. You have been living off your mother's charity for 7 years. You get to play baker all day because she graciously allowed you to use her property. You should be thanking her for supporting your little hobby for so long." I turned my intense gaze directly onto Chloe. "My little hobby paid the mortgage on this building for 5 straight years. I bought those industrial ovens. I replaced the plumbing. I worked 80-hour weeks to build the client list that paid for your luxury cars and your country club memberships. My mother owns the deed on paper because my credit was ruined when I took out a massive loan to bail Trey out of his first failed business 5 years ago. I am the financial backbone of this family." Trey flushed a deep, angry shade of red. "Do not talk to my wife like that. You are entirely out of line, Maya. Look at yourself. You are unhinged. You assaulted Chloe at the party, you ruined Jada's wedding announcement, and now you are harassing us on the street. It is completely pathetic." "I am not harassing you," I said, keeping my voice remarkably steady despite the rage boiling in my veins. "I am telling you to step aside so I can go into my kitchen and pack up my personal equipment. My recipes, my stand mixers, and my accounting ledgers are all inside that building." Trey crossed his arms over his chest and planted his feet firmly against the door. "You are not going inside. Mother explicitly told me not to let you anywhere near the property. She said you are a liability. Anything inside this building is now legally considered collateral for my startup." "You cannot just steal my life," I whispered, the sheer audacity of their greed finally catching up to me. "It was never your life," Chloe said with a cruel, satisfied smile. "You were just keeping the seat warm until Trey needed the space. You need to leave now before I call the police and tell them the crazy sister is back to cause more property damage." I stood on the sidewalk looking at the storefront I had poured my entire soul into. I could see the reflection of the rising sun in the large glass windows. I could see the hand-painted sign I had commissioned with my first month of profits. They were taking it all. They were stripping me down to absolutely nothing, convinced that without my family I would simply cease to exist. "Fine," I said softly. I took a deliberate step back from the door. "Keep the building, keep the ovens, but you cannot bake Trey, and you cannot code. You are going to run this place into the ground just like everything else you have ever touched." Trey smirked, jingling the new keys one last time. "We will see about that. Now get off my property." He turned to Chloe and nodded toward the glass door. "Give her the trash so she will finally leave us alone." Chloe turned on her expensive athletic shoes and disappeared into the darkened interior of my bakery. She was gone for less than a minute before she reappeared dragging a large, battered cardboard box that used to hold 50 pounds of bulk pastry flour. She did not bother to carry it properly. She dragged it across the beautiful vintage tile I had restored by hand, pushed the glass door open with her shoulder, and kicked the box out onto the sidewalk. "Take your pathetic little scrapbooks and get off my property," Chloe sneered. I emptied out the old steel filing cabinet in the back office. It was full of absolute garbage. "You have exactly 30 seconds to clear this mess before I call the precinct and tell them the crazy woman from the country club is trespassing." She shoved the box hard with her foot. It tipped over the edge of the entryway step and slammed onto the hard concrete. The cheap cardboard flap tore open. The bottom completely gave out. Everything I had kept hidden in my private office poured out onto the dirty Atlanta sidewalk. My worn, leather-bound recipe journals tumbled into the street. My custom-engraved offset spatulas clattered against the curb. A framed photograph of my late father, the only picture of him I still owned, hit the pavement face down. The glass shattered instantly, the sharp sound echoing down the quiet street. Trey let out a short, dismissive laugh. He took another sip of his artisan coffee, watching me stand there with my severely burned arms looking at the scattered wreckage of my entire professional life. He looked completely victorious. I slowly dropped to my knees. The movement pulled at the tight blistered skin on my forearms, sending a fresh wave of liquid fire radiating up to my shoulders, but I forced my expression to remain entirely blank. I carefully reached out to pick up the broken picture frame. As I lifted it, brushing the shards of broken glass away from my father's smiling face, I noticed something else had fallen from the box. It had been tucked inside a small hollowed-out space behind the thick cardboard backing of the photograph. It hit the pavement with a heavy, distinct metallic clink that cut through the cold morning air. I froze. Lying on the dirty concrete, gleaming faintly in the purple morning light, was a long, heavy brass key. It was thick and old-fashioned, with a prominent serial number deeply engraved into the square head. All the breath completely left my lungs. The busy sounds of the city waking up faded into absolute silence. I recognized that key immediately. 15 years ago, when I was 20 years old, my father was lying in a hospice bed, losing his final battle with pancreatic cancer. In his last few days of clarity, he gripped my hand and whispered that he knew exactly who my mother really was. He knew Loretta cared only about social status and appearances, and he knew she would eventually drain the family accounts to fund Jada's pageant lifestyle. He told me he had set up a private safety deposit box at First Atlanta Bank, entirely in my name, containing a safety net that Loretta could never touch. He said the key was hidden somewhere she would never look. But after he passed away, Loretta took total control of his estate. When I finally asked her about the deposit box at the bank, she looked me dead in the eye and told me the account had been seized to pay off his staggering medical debts. She swore the box was empty and the key was permanently lost. For 15 years I believed her. But Loretta had not lost it. She had just never bothered to look inside the cheap wooden picture frame sitting on my desk in the back office of the bakery. She had tossed all my belongings into that heavy steel cabinet years ago, refusing to look at her late husband's face, and Trey and Chloe had just dumped it onto the street without a second thought. I stared at the brass key. It was not just a piece of metal. It was undeniable proof that my mother had been lying to me since the day my father died. It was proof that she had intentionally kept me entirely dependent on her, trapping me in a cycle of financial obligation, while she propped up Jada and Trey with the money I earned. "Maya, did you not hear?" my wife Trey barked impatiently from the doorway. "Pick up your trash and leave. I have contractors arriving in 10 minutes to tear out those useless ovens." I did not look up at him. I kept my head bowed, hiding the fierce, dangerous clarity that had just settled over my entire body. I ignored the scattered spatulas. I ignored my life's work written in those leather journals. I reached out and closed my hand firmly around the heavy brass key. The cold metal pressed against my palm, anchoring me in reality. I slipped the key deep into the pocket of my coat. I slowly stood back up, clutching only the broken picture of my father. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not beg for my business back. The desperate, exhausted woman who had arrived at this bakery 10 minutes ago was completely gone. I looked at my brother. He was standing in front of the empire I had built, wearing a smug smile, entirely unaware that he had just handed me the exact weapon I was going to use to destroy him. "Good luck with the startup, Trey," I said. My voice was perfectly calm, smooth, and chillingly quiet. "You are going to need it." I turned my back on the bakery. I did not look back at Chloe as she yelled one final insult about calling the police. I did not look back at the shattered glass or the ruined recipes on the sidewalk. I walked away down Peachtree Street with my head held high, the heavy brass key burning a hole in my pocket, ready to finally unlock the legacy my father had left behind. By the time I reached the grand stone steps of First Atlanta Bank, the city was fully awake. Commuters in tailored suits and polished shoes rushed past me on the pavement, holding their briefcases and steaming cups of coffee. I stood at the bottom of the steps, acutely aware of how I looked. My chef coat was stained with dried caramel and faint streaks of blood. My arms were thickly wrapped in stiff medical gauze. I looked like a woman who had just survived a disaster, and in many ways I had. But as I gripped the heavy brass key inside my pocket, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The physical pain radiating from my burns was entirely secondary to the intense burning focus in my mind. I pushed through the heavy glass revolving doors and stepped into the quiet, echoing expanse of the bank lobby. The air conditioning was sharp, and the polished marble floors reflected the grand crystal chandeliers overhead. I walked directly past the teller lines and approached the main reception desk. The receptionist, a well-dressed woman with perfectly styled hair, looked up and immediately froze. Her eyes darted to my bandages, and my stained clothing, her expression a mixture of alarm and judgment. "I am here to access a private safety deposit box," I said, keeping my voice calm and authoritative. She hesitated, her hand hovering near her phone as if debating whether to call security. "Ma'am, do you have an appointment? The vault manager requires advance notice for access." I did not argue. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out the heavy brass key, and placed it firmly onto the pristine glass counter. The deep engraving on the head of the key caught the overhead light. I placed my Georgia driver's license right next to it. The receptionist looked at the key, recognized the vintage Premier banking serial number, and immediately sat up straighter. The judgment completely vanished from her face. She picked up her phone, pressed a single button, and within 2 minutes the senior vault manager was walking across the lobby to greet me. He did not ask about my appearance. He simply verified my identification, cross-referenced the serial number on the key with a thick leather ledger, and nodded politely. He guided me past the velvet ropes down a carpeted hallway and into the heavily fortified subterranean vault. The air down here was cold and smelled of oiled metal and aged paper. The walls were lined with thousands of small steel doors. We stopped in front of a large rectangular compartment near the bottom row. The manager inserted his master key into the left lock, stepped back, and gestured for me to use my key on the right. I slid the heavy brass key into the slot. I turned it. A loud, satisfying click echoed through the silent vault. The manager pulled the heavy steel drawer out, placed it onto a private viewing table in the center of the room, and quietly excused himself, closing the heavy grated door behind him. I stood alone in the vault, staring at the closed steel box. For 15 years, my mother had convinced me that my father had left us with absolutely nothing but staggering medical debt. She had used that lie to manipulate me, forcing me to work myself to the bone to repay a debt that I now suspected never existed. I took a deep breath, reached out and flipped the metal latch. I opened the lid. There was no money inside. There were no gold bars or expensive jewelry. Sitting at the bottom of the long metal box was a single thick manila envelope and a small velvet pouch. I opened the velvet pouch first. A heavy brass padlock and a single silver key slid into my palm. I set them aside and picked up the envelope. It was sealed with old tape that had turned yellow and brittle with age. I broke the seal and pulled out a stack of legal documents and a folded piece of personalized stationery. I unfolded the handwritten letter. The handwriting was shaky, written during the final painful weeks of his battle with cancer, but it was undeniably my father's. My dearest Maya, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means the key finally found its way to you, and it means your mother has finally pushed you out. I am so deeply sorry that I could not protect you from her. I have known for a very long time that Loretta does not view this family as a home. She views it as a business, and she has always intended to use your brilliant talent to subsidize Jada's lifestyle. I knew that if I left any money in the primary accounts, Loretta would drain it before my funeral was even over. She would take everything from you, Maya, and you deserve the world. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I traced my fingers over his ink. I could not leave you cash, he wrote, because cash can be seized by her lawyers. So I bought something she can never touch. Attached to this letter is the deed to a commercial property. It is fully paid off. There are absolutely no liens, no secret mortgages, and no loopholes. It is held in an ironclad trust that transferred 100% ownership directly to you on your 21st birthday. Do whatever you want with it, my beautiful girl. Build your empire. Do not let them dim your light. I love you. I carefully set the letter down, my hands trembling slightly. I turned to the thick stack of legal documents. It was a commercial real estate deed. I scanned the heavy black text looking for the property address, and when I found it, the breath completely left my lungs. It was not a small rundown storefront. It was a massive 15,000 square foot industrial warehouse located right in the heart of West Midtown. 15 years ago when my father bought it, West Midtown was an abandoned industrial district filled with empty train yards and crumbling brick buildings. It was cheap, forgotten land. But today, West Midtown was the absolute epicenter of Atlanta's booming real estate market. It was a multi-billion-dollar district packed with luxury lofts, high-end tech headquarters, and elite dining establishments. My brother Trey had just stolen my tiny, cramped bakery on Peachtree Street so he could look like a successful tech entrepreneur. He thought he had completely ruined my life. He had no idea that I was standing in a bank vault, holding the deed to a property worth at least $4 million. I carefully folded the documents, slid them back into the envelope, and placed the envelope inside my chef coat. I grabbed the padlock and the silver key, closed the steel box, and walked out of the bank. I did not go back to my apartment to rest. I hailed another rideshare and gave the driver the address in West Midtown. 30 minutes later, I was standing on a bustling street corner looking up at my new empire. The warehouse was a breathtaking piece of classic Atlanta industrial architecture. It had towering walls of beautifully weathered red brick, massive steel-framed windows that were currently covered from the inside, and a heavy rolling steel loading door. It was wedged perfectly between a luxury boutique hotel and a newly constructed corporate office building. The property was entirely fenced off with a chain-link gate secured by an old rusted padlock that looked like it had not been touched in a decade. I walked up to the gate, pulled the silver key from my pocket, and slid it into the padlock. It turned with a heavy, grinding crunch. The lock popped open. I pushed the heavy gate aside and walked to the side entrance door. My hands were bruised and bandaged. My body was running on pure adrenaline, but as I pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped into the cavernous darkness of the warehouse, I felt an overwhelming surge of raw power. Sunlight cut through the dust via the massive skylights in the vaulted ceiling. The space was absolutely massive. The concrete floors were thick and perfectly level. The exposed steel beams overhead were structurally flawless. It was an empty shell waiting to be brought back to life. My family thought they had silenced me. They thought stripping me of my bakery would force me to crawl back to them begging for scraps. But looking around this massive space, I did not see an empty warehouse. I saw dozens of gleaming stainless steel prep tables. I saw rows of massive industrial convection ovens. I saw a fleet of delivery vans lined up at the loading dock. Trey and Chloe wanted a commercial space. Jada wanted to prove she was better than me. My mother wanted to erase my independence. I smiled, the silence of the warehouse echoing with the promise of my father's hidden legacy. I was going to turn this abandoned building into the most ruthless, highly profitable ghost kitchen in the entire state of Georgia. I was going to dominate the luxury catering market from the shadows, bleeding their elite clientele dry without them ever knowing my name. The era of playing the dutiful, quiet daughter was officially dead. I was going to build an empire, and I was going to use it to crush them. I did not waste a single second. By noon that very same day, I was sitting in the sleek glass-walled office of a boutique corporate law firm downtown. I handed over a cashier's check funded by the last of my private savings and registered a blind limited liability company. I named it Onyx Hospitality. My actual name would not appear on any public registry, any business license, or any state tax document accessible to the general public. As far as the city of Atlanta or my family was concerned, Onyx was a faceless corporate entity owned by an airtight financial trust. I spent the next 3 weeks living entirely inside the West Midtown warehouse. My severe burns were finally healing into tight silver scars across my forearms, but I completely ignored the lingering ache. I used the ironclad commercial deed of the warehouse to secure a massive private business line of credit from an independent commercial lender who did not care about the ruined personal credit score my brother had left me with. I did not need to renovate the entire 15,000 square feet right away. I only needed one fortified corner. I brought in an elite team of private contractors who worked around the clock to install heavy-duty commercial plumbing, massive stainless steel ventilation hoods, and pristine prep tables. I purchased 4 state-of-the-art convection ovens and 3 walk-in refrigerators. I scrubbed the original industrial concrete floors on my hands and knees until they gleamed under the newly installed LED track lighting. I was not building a neighborhood bakery with a cute pastel storefront and a welcoming cash register. I was building a highly classified, heavily fortified ghost kitchen. There would be absolutely no foot traffic. There would be no display cases. Every single transaction would be strictly made to order, handled exclusively through a private encrypted website and delivered by a fleet of unmarked, climate-controlled luxury courier vehicles. I knew my mother's high society catering business inside and out. I knew every single one of her strategic weaknesses. Loretta's Patisserie had always relied entirely on my unseen labor to produce intricate, flawless desserts, but my mother had constantly forced me to cut corners on the raw ingredients to maximize her own profit margins. Without me running her kitchen, she would have to rely on cheap bulk suppliers and inexperienced bakers who simply could not execute my complex techniques. I knew her elite clients would notice the catastrophic drop in quality immediately. I designed the Onyx menu to be absolutely devastating. I did not bake simple cupcakes or standard buttercream wedding tiers. I created architectural sugar masterpieces. I crafted dark chocolate entremets filled with rare Madagascar vanilla bean mousse and tart passion fruit centers. I baked delicate, perfectly laminated croissants infused with black truffle butter. And I perfected my signature creation, a proprietary recipe I called the soul crust. It was a flawless, ultra-thin pastry shell that shattered beautifully on the very first bite, holding rich, deeply spiced fillings that tasted like pure, unadulterated luxury. I packaged my creations in heavy matte black boxes lined with crushed velvet and sealed with an unmarked gold wax stamp. I did not buy a single billboard or magazine advertisement. Instead, I weaponized the knowledge I had spent 7 years accumulating in the shadows. I knew the exact home addresses and private office suites of the top 50 event planners, wealthy socialites, and luxury bridal consultants in the city. I knew the exact gatekeepers who dictated where the old money and the new tech wealth of Atlanta spent their massive catering budgets. On a quiet Tuesday morning, I dispatched my private couriers to deliver 50 complimentary tasting boxes across the city. Each box contained a handwritten note on thick black cardstock. The note simply read, "Elevate your standard. Welcome to Onyx." The reaction was explosive. By Wednesday evening, my private business phone was ringing endlessly. The deep mystery of the brand was entirely intoxicating to the Atlanta elite. They worshipped exclusivity, and absolutely nothing was more exclusive than a master pastry chef who refused to show their face or reveal the location of their kitchen. High-profile event planners were practically begging my automated answering service for private consultations. Wealthy social media influencers began posting frantic unboxing videos of the sleek black packages, their eyes rolling back in pure ecstasy as they tasted the truffle croissants and the signature soul crust tarts. Onyx became a massive viral sensation overnight. It was the only catering name anyone in Buckhead or Midtown wanted to whisper at their exclusive dinner parties. As my anonymous empire rapidly expanded, I watched the slow, inevitable collapse of Loretta's Patisserie from afar. The luxury catering world is an incredibly small circle, and vicious industry gossip travels faster than a wildfire. Through my trusted network of wholesale suppliers and delivery drivers, I heard absolutely everything. I heard that Jada had tried to take over the kitchen management, but ended up throwing screaming hysterical tantrums when the newly hired bakers could not replicate my flawless recipes. I heard that my brother Trey was furious because his tech startup was failing, and the commercial bakery space he had stolen from me was currently sitting completely empty and useless. I heard that my mother had officially lost the prestigious Botanical Garden Spring Gala contract because the sample cakes she provided were dry, heavy, and completely uninspired. Her oldest clients were furious, demanding immediate refunds and canceling their massive holiday deposits to flock to the mysterious new ghost kitchen everyone was talking about. They were bleeding out. Every single time a high society bride canceled her contract with my mother to book Onyx, I felt a deep, profound satisfaction settle in my chest. My mother had stolen my building, truly believing she was taking my power. But she had only stolen a brick box. I was the magic. I was the talent. Without me, she was just an arrogant woman selling overpriced flour and sugar to people who were rapidly realizing they were being scammed. I worked 20-hour days fueled by a relentless burning drive. I hired a small, fiercely loyal team of prep cooks and drivers, paying them double the standard industry wage and swearing them to absolute secrecy with strict non-disclosure agreements. My massive warehouse was constantly filled with the rich, intoxicating smells of roasting pecans, melting dark chocolate, and bubbling caramel. But this time, the caramel did not burn me. This time, I was the one controlling the fire. I would stand at the center of my pristine kitchen late at night watching my staff precisely box hundreds of luxury pastries. I would look at the staggering revenue numbers climbing on my digital tablet. In just 2 months, Onyx had generated more sheer profit than Loretta's Patisserie had made in an entire year. I had built a fortress of wealth that my family could never touch. But building a massive, highly disruptive business in the shadows meant that eventually the biggest players in the city were going to come looking for the mastermind. I knew I could not hide my true identity forever. The elite hospitality conglomerates were starting to notice the massive dent I was making in the luxury market, and the biggest hospitality billionaire in Atlanta was currently hunting for a spectacular new national dessert contract, desperate to replace the mediocre supplier his fraudulent fiancée had tried to force upon him. It was exactly 2 in the morning on a rainy Thursday when the heavy security buzzer at the back of my warehouse echoed through the pristine kitchen. I was standing alone at the central stainless steel island, carefully tempering a massive bowl of dark chocolate. I did not have any late-night deliveries scheduled. I wiped my hands on a clean towel, walked over to the security monitor mounted on the brick wall, and looked at the live camera feed. Standing on my loading dock getting drenched by the Atlanta rain was Julian. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, holding a sleek black umbrella, and staring directly into the lens of the security camera. I stood there for a long moment watching the billionaire who was supposed to marry my sister in less than 3 months. I had gone to incredible lengths to mask the physical location of my ghost kitchen. I used dummy corporations, encrypted routing numbers, and blind delivery drop zones. But Julian was not just a wealthy socialite like the rest of my family. He was a ruthless corporate titan who had built an international empire from nothing. I unlocked the heavy steel door and pushed it open. The cold, damp air rushed into the warm, sweet-smelling kitchen. "You are incredibly difficult to track down." "Maya," Julian said, stepping inside and shaking the rain from his umbrella. I crossed my arms, making sure the sleeves of my chef coat completely covered my healing scars. "I pay a corporate law firm a ridiculous amount of money to make sure I am impossible to track down." "How did you find this address, Julian?" He looked around the cavernous, gleaming expanse of the warehouse. He took in the massive convection ovens, the pristine prep stations, and the towering stacks of unmarked black velvet boxes. His eyes gleamed with profound professional respect. He was looking at me not as a victim of my toxic family, but as an absolute equal. "I own the paper supply company in Chicago that manufactures your custom matte black packaging," Julian stated calmly. "When my executive board brought a box of onyx pastries into our quarterly strategy meeting yesterday, I took one bite of the truffle croissant and knew exactly who baked it. Nobody else in Atlanta laminates dough like you." I pulled the private shipping manifest from my own warehouse. "It took me 12 hours to bypass your legal walls and find this address." I kept my expression entirely neutral. "Congratulations on your investigative skills. But this is a secure commercial facility and I do not do private tours. What do you want?" Julian reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick leather folder. He placed it squarely on the stainless steel prep table. "I want a national supplier," he said, his voice dropping into a serious, commanding register. "My hospitality group is opening 14 new luxury boutique hotels across the country over the next 2 years. I need a signature dessert vendor to anchor all of our high-end restaurants. 2 days ago, your mother and Jada came to my corporate office to pitch Loretta's Patisserie for the contract." I let out a short, cynical laugh. "Let me guess. The samples were completely uninspired." "They were an absolute embarrassment," Julian corrected, his tone completely flat. "The cakes were dry, the presentation was sloppy, and Jada threw a tantrum in my boardroom when my tasting director politely asked about the ingredients. Jada has completely lost control of that bakery without you. I officially rejected their proposal this morning. I am entirely done doing business with your family, Maya." He tapped the leather folder on the table. "I want onyx. I want exclusive rights to distribute your pastries in every single hotel I own. This contract is worth 7 figures in the first year alone. I will provide the massive refrigerated logistics fleet you need to scale up, and you maintain absolute creative control." I stared at the leather folder, the reality of the offer settling over me. This was the exact kind of monumental leverage I had been working toward. But I also knew the dangerous complication of getting into bed with the man my sister was supposedly marrying. I picked up the contract, but I did not open it. I looked directly into his eyes, refusing to be intimidated by his wealth. "If I sign this, Julian, there are strict rules. This is a business partnership. It is not a favor. It is not compensation for the car crash 6 months ago. And it absolutely does not mean I am going to save you from the miserable reality of your engagement to my sister. You have to handle Jada on your own. My kitchen, my rules, and my family stays entirely out of it." Julian did not flinch. He extended his hand. "Strictly business, Maya. I would not have it any other way." We shook on it. It was a massive, life-changing victory. But the quiet triumph of my new empire did not even last a full week. 4 days later, Julian's corporate logistics team began integrating their massive branded refrigerated supply trucks with my loading dock to streamline our new national shipping route. I was standing on the concrete ramp in the bright afternoon sun, holding a digital tablet and checking off a massive shipment of vanilla beans, when a sleek, aggressively expensive sports car sped down the narrow alleyway and slammed on its brakes right in front of my gate. My brother Trey practically fell out of the driver's seat. He looked absolutely terrible. His designer fleece vest was wrinkled, he had dark, heavy bags under his eyes, and he was sweating profusely despite the cool autumn breeze. I knew immediately what was happening. His tech startup was finally collapsing. The venture capitalists had likely pulled their funding, and he was drowning. Trey did not look at me at first. He was staring wide-eyed at the massive transport trucks bearing the logo of Julian's hospitality group. Then his eyes drifted up to the towering brick walls of the West Midtown warehouse. Finally, he looked at the open loading door where he could see the stacks of sleek black onyx boxes waiting to be loaded. He slowly walked up the concrete ramp, his breathing shallow and erratic. He looked like a desperate man who had just stumbled onto a gold mine. "You," Trey whispered, a manic, unhinged smile spreading across his face. "You are the viral chef. The whole city is tearing itself apart trying to find out who owns Onyx, and it is you. You have been hiding in this massive warehouse while I have been sitting in your cramped little bakery going completely bankrupt. You need to leave this property right now, Trey," I ordered, stepping firmly in front of the open loading doors. "This is a private commercial facility. You are trespassing." Trey let out a loud, chaotic laugh. He ran a hand over his face, shaking his head. "I am not going anywhere, Maya. Do you have any idea how much debt I am in? The bank is going to seize my house by Friday. Mother cannot bail me out because her catering business is completely tanking. But you," he pointed a shaking finger at my chest, "you are sitting on a multi-million-dollar brand, and you just landed the biggest corporate contract in the state." I stood my ground, my posture rigid. "I built this company myself. You are not getting a single dime of my money. I told you that you were going to ruin everything you touched, and you did. Now get off my loading dock before I have security throw you into the street." Trey stopped laughing. His face hardened into a mask of pure, vicious entitlement. He stepped so close to me I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. "You are going to give me 80% of this entire company, Maya," he demanded, his voice dropping to a dark, threatening whisper. "You are going to sign the LLC over to me right now, and I am going to use this revenue to save my startup." I stared at him in utter disbelief. "You are completely delusional. I will never sign anything over to you." Trey smiled, a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "Do you remember Chloe's Uncle Maya, the one who works for the city?" My blood ran completely cold. Chloe's uncle was the deputy director of the Atlanta Commercial Health and Safety Board. He was notorious for taking massive bribes from wealthy restaurant groups to shut down their smaller competitors using fabricated health code violations. Trey pulled his phone out of his pocket and tapped the screen, holding his thumb right over the call button. "If you do not give me 80% of this company today, I am going to make one phone call. Chloe's uncle will send an emergency strike team to this warehouse before sunset. They will completely fabricate a massive rodent infestation. They will red tag your doors, permanently revoke your commercial operating license, and confiscate every single piece of expensive equipment in that kitchen. They will leak the story to the press, and your precious Onyx brand will be completely destroyed before you even go public." He leaned in closer, his eyes practically bulging with desperate greed. "You are going to lose everything again, Maya. Sign the company over to me, or I will burn your entire empire to the ground today." The threat of having my entire empire shut down by a corrupt city official hung in the damp air like thick smoke. I looked at Trey, taking in the desperate, sweaty reality of the man standing before me. He was not a strategic mastermind. He was a drowning rat, pulling anyone he could reach down with him. But I was not going to let him pull me under. I had spent 15 years watching my mother manipulate people by playing the victim, and now it was time to use her own playbook against her favorite son. I let my shoulders slump forward, perfectly mimicking the posture of total defeat. I allowed the rigid confidence that had defined my posture for the last 2 months to completely evaporate. I looked down at the concrete ramp, biting my lower lip, as if I was fighting back tears. "Okay, Trey," I whispered, my voice trembling just enough to sound completely broken. "You win. Please do not call the city. Please do not take my equipment. I have put everything I have into this kitchen." Trey let out a loud, arrogant bark of laughter. He lowered his phone, slipping it back into his pocket with a triumphant smirk. "I knew you would crack, Maya. You always fold when things get difficult. It is why you will never be a real CEO. You need a man with actual business acumen to take the wheel." I forced myself to nod slowly, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. "I agree," I said softly. "I will give you the 80% equity share. I will sign the operating agreement over to your startup. But Trey, I cannot just hand over a piece of paper on the loading dock. Onyx is a massive corporation now. We have complex supplier contracts and heavily audited inventory logs. Julian's legal team is incredibly strict about the transition of equity. Trey crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing with sudden suspicion. What exactly are you saying, Maya? Are you trying to stall me? No, I said quickly, holding up my bandaged hands in a placating gesture. I am not stalling. I am telling you that if you want this company to legally save your startup from bankruptcy, we have to do it by the book. You need to send Chloe here tomorrow afternoon. She is your chief financial officer on paper, right? She needs to formally audit my physical inventory and sign off on the asset transfer ledger before we execute the new operating agreement. Trey scoffed, rolling his eyes at the mention of administrative work. Chloe hates warehouses. They trigger her allergies. I know, I replied smoothly. But she has to do it, Trey. If she does not sign the physical asset ledger, Julian's corporate lawyers will immediately flag the transfer as fraudulent and block the contract. Do you really want to risk losing a seven-figure deal because you skipped the paperwork? The mention of the seven-figure deal instantly erased any remaining hesitation. Trey's greed completely overpowered his basic common sense. Fine, he snapped. Chloe will be here tomorrow at 3. Have all the books open and ready. And Maya, do not try anything stupid. One wrong move and I make the phone call. He turned on his heel, practically jogging back to his leased sports car. He sped out of the alleyway, the tires squealing on the wet pavement. I stood on the loading dock watching his taillights disappear into the Atlanta traffic. The moment he was gone, my slumped posture vanished. I stood up perfectly straight, a cold, dangerous smile spreading across my face. Trey had just walked blindly into the exact trap I wanted him in. I immediately went back inside the warehouse and locked the heavy steel door. I walked over to the central security panel mounted on the brick wall and opened the master control interface. When I built the Onyx kitchen, I did not just install high-end ovens. I installed a state-of-the-art military-grade 4K security system with hidden lenses embedded in the stainless steel ventilation hoods and the industrial light fixtures. Every single square foot of the facility was recorded in pristine high-definition video with crystal-clear audio capture. But I needed absolute assurance that tomorrow would go exactly as planned. I needed Chloe to feel completely comfortable showing her true colors. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously arranging the kitchen to look exactly like the operation of an overwhelmed, exhausted small business owner. I pulled out stacks of messy, handwritten inventory sheets and scattered them across the central prep table. I left a few of the massive 60-quart commercial mixers running on low speed, the large stainless steel bowls filled with expensive raw ingredients for the evening pastry service. I strategically placed my most expensive custom imported chocolate molds near the edge of the tables. I wanted the environment to feel chaotic and vulnerable. Chloe thrived on chaos when it belonged to someone else. She fed on the insecurity of the working class. At exactly 2:30 the next afternoon, my private security app pinged my phone. I pulled up the live feed and watched a sleek black luxury SUV pull into the loading alley. Chloe stepped out wearing an immaculate white designer pantsuit and oversized sunglasses, looking completely out of place against the weathered brick of West Midtown. I quickly tied my stained apron tighter around my waist, checked the live feed to ensure all cameras were actively recording to the secure cloud server, and walked to the front door to let her in. Chloe did not bother to say hello. She pushed past me the moment I unlocked the heavy steel door, immediately waving her hand in front of her face, as if the sweet smell of roasting vanilla beans was somehow offensive. "This neighborhood is absolutely disgusting, Maya," she announced loudly, her designer heels clicking sharply on the polished concrete. "I cannot believe you make food in this part of the city." I practically had to roll up my windows to avoid making eye contact with the locals. I closed the door behind her, locking the deadbolt with a loud, definitive click. "The lease was cheap, Chloe," I replied mildly, leading her toward the main prep area. She stopped in the center of the kitchen, taking her sunglasses off to survey the massive, gleaming facility. Despite her practiced disdain, I could see a brief flash of genuine shock in her eyes. She had expected to find me sweating in a dirty, cramped garage. Instead, she was standing inside a multi-million-dollar culinary fortress. The sheer scale of my success clearly irritated her deeply. She immediately masked her surprise with a sharp sneer. Well, it looks like you actually spent the money Trey loaned you somewhat responsibly. Let us get this over with. I have a Pilates class at 5 and I do not want to smell like yeast when I get there. Show me the asset ledgers so I can sign the transfer. She walked over to the central stainless steel island and slammed her expensive leather briefcase down right on top of my carefully arranged messy inventory sheets. She crossed her arms, looking at me with the absolute certainty of a predator who believed she had cornered a wounded animal. She was entirely unaware that the animal was the one who had locked the cage. Chloe flipped through the top 3 pages of the ledger, with the tip of her manicured finger lifting her hand as if the paper itself might somehow infect her. She sighed dramatically, the sound echoing in the cavernous space of the warehouse. Honestly, Maya, I do not know how you manage to live like this. She adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses, pushing them up into her perfectly highlighted hair. The smell of sugar and yeast in this building is so completely overwhelming, it is giving me a massive migraine. It is so heavy and unsophisticated. I stood quietly by the stainless steel sink, resting my hands on the cool metal, watching her perform. It is a working kitchen, Chloe, I replied evenly. Working being the operative word, she sneered, running a critical eye over the strategically messy prep tables I had set up. She opened her expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, pristine stack of legal documents. Trey was incredibly generous to even offer you 20% of this chaotic little operation. Most venture capitalists would have just taken the entire company and kicked you out onto the street. But as I always tell the women in my country club, book club, we have a profound moral obligation to uplift minority-owned micro-businesses, even when those businesses are managed this poorly. I stared at her, marveling at the absolute audacity of her performative allyship. She wore her progressive vocabulary like a luxury accessory, using it to mask a deeply rooted vicious superiority complex. She slapped a heavy gold monogrammed pen onto the table right next to the operating agreement. Sign the bottom of page 7 and initial page 9. Do it quickly. I told my personal trainer I would be on the treadmill by 5, and I need to shower twice just to get the smell of this neighborhood off my skin. I walked slowly over to the central island. I picked up the heavy gold pen, feeling its cold weight in my palm. I looked down at the contract. It was a predatory masterpiece meticulously designed to strip me of all voting rights, seize my intellectual property, and siphon every single cent of Onyx revenue directly into Trey's failing tech account. It would leave me as an employee in my own empire entirely at their mercy. I looked back up at Chloe. She was currently checking her reflection in the dark screen of her smartphone, completely unbothered, utterly convinced of her own inevitable victory. I set the gold pen back down onto the stainless steel table. It landed with a sharp, definitive click. No, I said softly. Chloe stopped looking at her phone. She blinked, her brow furrowing in genuine, absolute confusion, as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Excuse me, what did you just say to me? I said no, Chloe. I crossed my arms over my chest, standing entirely upright, dropping the defeated posture I had been faking since yesterday. I am not signing this contract. I am not giving you or my brother a single percentage of this company. You can take your predatory paperwork and walk right back out that door. The silence in the massive warehouse was sudden and deafening. Chloe stared at me, her mouth slightly open. I watched the fake progressive ally mask the one she wore so proudly to charity galas and social justice rallies begin to crack and fall away in jagged, ugly pieces. Her face flushed a deep, mottled shade of red. The thin veneer of high society elegance completely evaporated, revealing the petty, hateful woman hiding underneath. "You arrogant, ungrateful little baker," she hissed. Her voice was no longer polished. It was raw, grating, and vicious. "Do you have any idea who you are dealing with? My uncle will have this filthy brick oven shut down by tomorrow morning. You will be completely bankrupt." "Call him!" I challenged, my voice deadly calm. "Call your corrupt uncle right now. Let him come down here. Let him try to find a single health code violation in a kitchen I clean with bleach every single night." "But I am not signing that paper," Chloe snapped. The realization that she could not bully me, that her threats were bouncing off my armor, pushed her entirely over the edge. She lunged forward and grabbed the thick stack of my handwritten inventory sheets, ripping them in half with a guttural sound of frustration and throwing the shredded paper directly into my face. "You think you are so smart, Maya?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You think because you went viral on the internet you are suddenly untouchable. You are nothing." She spun around and grabbed a tall stack of custom-imported polycarbonate chocolate molds that cost me $300 each. She raised them high above her head and slammed them down onto the polished concrete floor with all her strength. The expensive specialized plastic shattered into 100 jagged pieces, exploding across the room like shrapnel. "Hey!" I yelled, taking a quick step forward, but I instantly stopped myself, forcing my feet to remain firmly planted. I needed her to keep going. I needed her to cross the definitive threshold of a major felony. Chloe saw my brief hesitation and completely misinterpreted it as fear. It acted like gasoline on the fire of her rage. She marched aggressively over to the industrial prep station, where 3 heavy-duty stand mixers were currently churning large batches of delicate, vibrant purple macaron batter. She grabbed the first massive stainless steel bowl, unlatched it from the heavy base, and shoved it hard off the counter. The bowl crashed to the floor with a deafening metallic clang, splattering perfectly aerated meringue all over the pristine tiles and across the bottom of her designer white pantsuit. She did not even notice the stain. She grabbed a heavy steel rolling pin from the drying rack and swung it like a baseball bat, smashing it directly into the digital control panel of the second mixer. The expensive glass screen cracked instantly. She hit it again, shattering the housing and breaking the internal motor mechanism. Sparks flew from the ruined $2,000 machine as it ground to a violent halt. "You are a bitter, jealous woman playing chef in a rundown ghetto?" Chloe screamed, her perfectly styled hair now a wild, frantic mess around her flushed face. "We are your family. You owe us this money." She looked around this kitchen frantically, her chest heaving, searching for something else to destroy. Her manic eyes landed on the commercial cleaning cart parked near the back wall. She ran over and grabbed a massive industrial-sized gallon jug of concentrated bleach. She twisted the plastic cap off with frantic, unhinged energy. She marched directly back to the central prep island. Resting on the steel surface was a massive 50-quart batch of my signature soul crust dough. It was worth hundreds of dollars in premium imported ingredients, and it was the foundation of the massive order I had to ship to Julian's hotels by tomorrow morning. Before I could even blink, Chloe lifted the heavy plastic jug and upended it. The clear, highly toxic chemical cascaded out in a thick wave, splashing directly into the expensive butter and flour. The pungent, burning smell of raw bleach instantly overpowered the sweet scent of vanilla, filling the air with a hazardous chemical stench. She permanently ruined the dough, contaminated the entire stainless steel workspace, and turned the center of my kitchen into a toxic biohazard zone. Chloe threw the empty plastic jug onto the floor, where it bounced and rolled away. She stood in the center of the devastated kitchen, breathing heavily, completely surrounded by shattered plastic, broken machinery, and ruined food. Her immaculate white designer suit was splattered with purple batter and dark streaks of grease. She looked absolutely unhinged, but as she looked at the destruction, she had just caused a cruel, vindictively triumphant smile stretched across her face. There she panted, pointing a shaking finger at the ruined dough. "Now you have absolutely nothing to sell tonight anyway. You have until tomorrow morning to sign those papers, Maya. If you do not, Trey is making the call, and I will personally make sure you never work in this city again." She snatched her leather briefcase off the table, turned on her ruined heels, and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the heavy metal door so hard the walls rattled. The echo of the slamming door faded, leaving only the quiet, sickening sound of bleach sizzling against the ruined pastry dough. I stood in the wreckage of my beautiful kitchen. I did not cry. I did not panic over the thousands of dollars of destroyed equipment. I simply looked up at the ceiling, looking directly at the tiny, blinking red light hidden inside the stainless steel ventilation hood. I smiled. Chloe had just handed me every single piece of evidence I needed to destroy her life. The heavy metal door clicked shut, leaving me completely alone in the toxic fumes of bleach and ruined vanilla. I stood in the center of the devastated kitchen, surrounded by thousands of dollars of shattered polycarbonate molds and broken machinery. I did not grab a mop. I did not fall to my knees and weep over the massive batch of signature dough that was currently dissolving into a hazardous chemical puddle on my prep table. I took a deep, steadying breath, walked over to the stainless steel sink to wash the bleach splatter off my hands, and pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the secure server application linked to the military-grade cameras I had installed the week before. I quickly scrubbed through the timeline, isolating the exact 12 minutes from the moment Chloe walked through my front door to the moment she stormed out. The footage was breathtakingly clear in pristine 4K resolution. The audio microphones had perfectly captured every single vicious classist insult, every threat of extortion regarding her uncle at the health department, and the deafening crash of every piece of equipment she had destroyed. I did not call the local police precinct. I was no longer a helpless baker trying to survive on the margins. I was the chief executive of a rapidly expanding corporation, and Onyx Hospitality was now officially partnered with a billion-dollar hospitality conglomerate. I attached the encrypted video file to an email and sent it directly to the lead corporate attorney on Julian's legal team, flagging it with a high-priority emergency tag. My phone rang less than 2 minutes later. The attorney did not offer hollow apologies or ask how I was feeling. He was a shark, and I had just handed him blood in the water. He confirmed receipt of the footage, informed me that Chloe had caused well over $50,000 in commercial property damage, and told me to lock the warehouse and wait for his private security contractors to arrive. He assured me that his office would handle the local authorities directly. They did exactly that. I did not have to be there to witness it, but the details spread through the Atlanta high society network faster than wildfire. Chloe never made it to her 5 o'clock Pilates class. She was still sitting in the lavish lobby of her elite Buckhead Fitness Club, sipping a complimentary cucumber water and bragging to her wealthy friends about how she had just put her husband's ungrateful sister in her place. She was still wearing the designer white pantsuit completely stained with my purple macaron batter. 2 uniformed police officers walked straight through the glass doors of the studio. They did not ask her to step outside quietly. They loudly announced her full legal name and placed her under arrest for felony destruction of commercial property and attempted corporate extortion. They pulled her arms behind her back and clamped heavy steel handcuffs over her expensive silk sleeves right in front of the horrified country club women she spent her entire life trying to impress. Chloe screamed, cried, and demanded to call her uncle, completely shattering her refined, progressive illusion in front of half the city. The immediate financial fallout for my brother was absolute and catastrophic. Because the charges involved federal extortion of a commercial supply chain, the magistrate judge set her bail at a staggering $250,000. Trey was already drowning in debt. His tech startup was a hollow shell, and his venture capital funding had completely dried up. To keep his wife out of a county jail cell, Trey had to drain every single cent of his remaining business accounts and take out a massive predatory personal loan. He effectively bankrupted himself overnight. While Trey was sitting in a bail bondsman office watching his entire fake empire burn to the ground, I was rebuilding mine. Julian's private security team arrived at the warehouse within the hour, bringing a specialized commercial hazard crew to completely sterilize the bleach contamination. I called in my most trusted prep cooks. I offered them triple overtime, and they showed up without a single complaint. We worked in absolute silence through the night, operating the remaining functional mixers, measuring fresh ingredients, and racing against the clock. By 6 in the morning, the heavy delivery trucks pulled up to my loading dock, and we loaded every single matte black box onto the pallets. We did not miss a single delivery for Julian's luxury hotels. I went to the small office in the back of the warehouse, poured myself a strong cup of black coffee, and finally sat down. I had won the battle. Chloe was facing serious prison time and Trey was ruined. But I had severely underestimated the venomous, desperate lengths my mother would go to when she felt her family's social standing slipping through her fingers. At 9 o'clock that morning, my business phone began to ring. It was not a new luxury client trying to secure a tasting menu. It was a cancellation. 10 minutes later, another high-profile event planner called to immediately terminate their contract. By noon, Onyx had lost 6 major corporate holiday accounts. I opened my laptop to find out what was happening, and the truth hit me right in the face. My mother had gone on the nuclear offensive. Loretta had spent decades cultivating immense social power as a prominent board member of her megachurch and a leading figure in the elite HBCU alumni networks. She was a master of public relations, and she had just weaponized her entire network against me. She had drafted a beautifully written, utterly devastating mass email and sent it to thousands of the wealthiest residents in the Atlanta registry. The subject line read, "A mother's heartbreak." In the email, she played the ultimate tragic victim. She claimed that I had suffered a complete psychological break. She spun a brilliant, horrifying lie telling the city that I had violently attacked Chloe in a manic episode, forcing the police to intervene. But worse than the personal attacks, she completely exposed my secret. She told the entire city that Maya was the hidden owner of Onyx Hospitality. She claimed that my ghost kitchen was a hazardous, unsanitary environment run by a deeply disturbed woman, and she strongly urged her entire congregation and social circle to boycott my business for their own safety. She used her powerful connections to completely blacklist my name. She made sure that associating with Onyx became a massive social liability for any wealthy bride or corporate planner in the city. But Loretta did not stop there. The final paragraph of her email was dedicated to Jada's upcoming wedding to Julian. She knew the rumors about the ruined engagement party and the failing family bakery were circulating, so she moved quickly to protect her golden child. Loretta proudly announced that they had officially severed all ties with local caterers. She declared that to ensure Jada's wedding remained the most spectacular event of the decade, they had secured a world-class, highly exclusive pastry chef flying in directly from Paris to design the wedding cake. It was a brilliant, vicious counterattack. My mother was trying to erase my talent from the city's memory. She was trying to starve my new business to death by turning my own community against me, while simultaneously elevating Jada to an untouchable level of international luxury. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the mass email on my screen. My mother thought she had finally backed me into a corner I could not escape. She thought public shame would force me to surrender. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a direct message from Julian. He did not ask about my mother's massive smear campaign or the sudden cancellations hitting my books. He knew exactly what was happening, and he knew exactly how we were going to respond. The message contained a highly secure digital invitation and a single sentence. "Wear something breathtaking tomorrow night. We are going to the gala." The invitation was not just a piece of thick gold-embossed cardstock. It was a weapon. The Atlanta Botanical Gardens Spring Gala was the absolute pinnacle of high society, an event so exclusive that tickets were not sold, they were bestowed. And this year, my mother had staked the last remaining shred of our family's reputation on Jada, making a triumphant appearance as a billionaire's fiancé. I spent the entire afternoon preparing with military precision. I did not wear the pastel silks or modest cuts my mother had always forced upon me. I went to a high-end boutique in Buckhead and purchased a stunning floor-length gown made of deep emerald velvet. It hugged my curves flawlessly, the rich color a sharp contrast against my skin. The sleeves were long and fitted completely, concealing the healing burn scars on my forearms, but the back plunged low, a deliberate statement of confidence. I wore my hair swept up in an elegant twist, and my makeup was sharp and unyielding. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see the quiet baker who used to apologize for taking up space. I saw the CEO of Onyx Hospitality. At exactly 7 o'clock, Julian's private town car arrived at my apartment. He stepped out to open the door for me, wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. When he saw me, he stopped for a fraction of a second, his dark eyes sweeping over the emerald velvet. "You look dangerous, Maya," he said, a slow, approving smile touching his lips. "That is exactly the point," I replied, stepping into the luxurious leather interior of the car. The drive to the botanical garden was quiet, the tension between us crackling with anticipation. We were not going as romantic partners. We were going as corporate allies, stepping onto a battlefield to execute a highly coordinated strategy. The entrance to the gala was a blinding barrage of camera flashes and screaming paparazzi. The entire garden had been transformed into a sprawling, enchanted forest of thousands of white orchids and dripping crystal chandeliers. We stepped onto the green carpet, and the reaction was instantaneous. Julian was one of the most famous men in the city, and the press immediately swarmed us. But they did not ask about his hospitality empire. They asked who the mysterious woman on his arm was. Julian did not answer them. He simply placed a firm, respectful hand on the small of my back and guided me past the barricades and into the grand, glass-domed atrium. The moment we crossed the threshold, the lively chatter of 500 elite guests faltered. Heads turned. Whispers swept through the room like a sudden gust of wind. I kept my head high, my posture impeccable. I scanned the room, bypassing the mayor, the local celebrities, and the corporate titans. Then I found them, standing near the center of the atrium, desperately holding court with a group of older socialites, were my mother and Jada. Jada was wearing a massive, ostentatious white ball gown that looked more suited for a coronation than a charity gala. She was laughing loudly, throwing her head back in an exaggerated display of joy. Loretta stood beside her, sipping champagne and nodding regally, projecting the absolute picture of high society grace. Then Loretta's eyes met mine. The champagne glass in her hand trembled. Her regal smile vanished, replaced by an expression of profound, unadulterated shock. She grabbed Jada's arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into the white silk. Jada turned, annoyed by the interruption, and then she saw us. Her jaw literally dropped. The color drained completely from her face. She looked at Julian, the billionaire she had been claiming as her fiancé, walking into the most important event of the year with the sister she had just publicly branded as dangerously insane. Julian leaned down slightly, his voice a low rumble near my ear. "Shall we go say hello?" "Lead the way," I murmured, keeping a serene, untouchable smile on my face. We walked across the polished marble floor. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea, the whispers growing louder with every step. When we finally stopped in front of my family, the silence between us was absolutely deafening. "Julian!" My mother finally choked out, her voice tight with panic. She frantically tried to assemble her social mask, her eyes darting nervously to the wealthy women standing nearby. "What a wonderful surprise! We did not expect you to arrive so early." "And Maya?" She swallowed hard, her eyes flashing with a desperate warning. "I am so relieved you are feeling better, sweetheart. We were all so worried about your little episode." I did not let her spin the narrative. I smiled warmly, my voice ringing out clearly in the quiet atrium. "I have never felt better, Mother. I am incredibly grateful to Julian for inviting me as his VIP guest tonight. It gave me a wonderful excuse to step away from the kitchen." Jada stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her eyes were practically bulging with rage. "Julian, why is she here? You know she is unwell, she should not be in public." Julian did not look at Jada with anger or pity. He looked at her with the cold, absolute indifference of a man looking at a stranger. "Maya is my +1 Jada," he said smoothly. "And as my exclusive corporate partner, her presence here is highly relevant." "Corporate partner?" My mother echoed the word, sounding foreign and terrifying on her tongue. "Yes," I interjected, turning my gaze fully onto Loretta. "Onyx Hospitality just signed an exclusive national contract with Julian's hotel group. It has been a very busy week. Speaking of busy, how is the catering business holding up without me, Mother? I heard about the sudden cancellations. It must be devastating to lose so many long-standing clients in a single day." Loretta's face turned a mottled, ugly shade of red. She realized in that exact moment that her mass email had failed. Her attempt to destroy my reputation had not broken me. It had only solidified my power. But Jada was not smart enough to realize the game was over. She was too arrogant, too obsessed with her own illusion. "You think you are so clever," Maya Jada hissed, leaning in close so the other guests could not hear. "You think walking in here on his arm makes you important? You are nothing. You are a baker hiding behind a fake corporate name. But I am the bride, And tonight I am going to prove to this entire room that I never needed you." She spun around, gesturing dramatically toward the far end of the atrium, where a massive circular table sat under a spotlight draped in heavy white velvet. "They are about to unveil the dessert course," Jada announced, her voice rising to a triumphant pitch. "The masterpiece that I created. The one I baked with my own hands to celebrate my engagement. When everyone in this room tastes it, they will know exactly who the real talent in this family is." I looked at the covered table, and then I looked back at Jada. A cold, dangerous thrill shot down my spine. "I cannot wait to taste it," I said softly. Jada snapped her fingers at the catering director. The heavy white velvet drape was immediately pulled away from the massive circular table. A collective gasp echoed through the glass-domed atrium of the botanical garden. Sitting beneath the blazing glow of a dedicated spotlight was a towering five-tiered masterpiece. It was a breathtaking architectural structure of spun sugar adorned with hundreds of delicate, individually plated artisan tarts. The presentation was flawless, practically glowing with a rich golden gloss that caught the light perfectly. The wealthy guests murmured in absolute awe, pulling out their phones to capture the display. My mother stood incredibly tall, her chest puffed out with immense manufactured pride. But as I stepped closer to the table, my eyes scanning the intricate details of the pastry, a deep knowing calm settled over my entire body. I did not need to taste it to know exactly what it was. I recognized the impossibly thin, perfectly laminated edges of the pastry shells. I recognized the deep spiced amber color of the filling. And most importantly, I recognized the distinct mirror-like shine of the trademark glaze. It was the soul crust. It was my proprietary recipe, the exact formula that had just secured me a seven-figure national contract. The pieces fell into place instantly. When Chloe had kicked that box of my belongings out onto the sidewalk, I had walked away with the brass key and the photograph of my father, leaving my old leather-bound recipe journals scattered on the concrete. Jada must have driven to the bakery after I left, picked up the ruined journals from the street, and handed my life's work directly to whatever expensive replacement bakers she had hired, claiming the brilliance as her own. Jada confidently took a wireless microphone from the event coordinator. She stepped into the spotlight, looking out at the crowd of 500 elite guests, her diamond necklace sparkling brilliantly. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Jada began, her voice dripping with practiced, performative humility. "As many of you know, my family has faced some unexpected challenges recently with our catering business. But adversity breeds true innovation. I realized that if I wanted my upcoming wedding to Julian to be truly spectacular, I could not rely on anyone else. I had to step up. I spent the last several weeks locked in the test kitchen, pouring my entire heart and soul into developing a completely original dessert." She paused, placing a delicate hand over her chest, feigning deep emotion. "I wanted to create something that represents the luxury, the resilience, and the flawless standard of my new life. I call this my masterpiece. Please, everyone, enjoy." The atrium erupted into thunderous applause. My mother beamed, looking around the room to ensure every single socialite was witnessing her golden child's triumphant moment. Jada lowered the microphone, a smug, victorious smile plastered across her face. She looked directly at me, her eyes daring me to cause a scene, daring me to sound like a jealous, crazy sister, claiming the recipe was mine. She expected me to yell. She expected me to throw a tantrum. Instead, I simply smiled. I let go of Julian's arm, the emerald velvet of my gown sweeping gracefully across the marble floor as I stepped directly into the spotlight with her. I reached out, keeping my movements perfectly calm and deliberate. Jada, caught completely off guard by my absolute serenity, did not pull away in time. I gently took the microphone right out of her hand. I turned to the crowd. The applause instantly died down, replaced by a thick, breathless silence. Everyone remembered the explosive rumors about my supposed mental breakdown. They were waiting for a disaster. "What a truly beautiful speech, Jada," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive atrium. The audio system was flawless, carrying every single syllable to the very back of the room. It takes an incredible amount of dedication to develop a proprietary recipe from scratch. The lamination on this pastry is exceptional. The glaze is absolutely perfectly tempered. It is a stunning achievement for someone who has never baked a single loaf of bread in her entire life. A quiet, uncomfortable ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Jada's smug smile completely vanished. Her eyes widened with sudden panic. "Give me the microphone, Maya," she hissed under her breath, reaching out to grab it. I smoothly stepped just out of her reach, picking up a small silver dessert fork from the table. But as any true master chef will tell you, I continued speaking directly to the mesmerized audience. You cannot simply serve a masterpiece without honoring the tradition of the kitchen. A true chef must always take the very first bite of their own creation. It is the ultimate proof of their labor. I picked up one of the delicate golden tarts from the bottom tier of the display. I held it out to Jada, resting it on a crisp white napkin. "Go ahead, Jada," I challenged softly, keeping the microphone close to my mouth so everyone could hear the quiet, deadly authority in my voice. "Show us your triumph. Take the first bite." Jada froze. She stared at the small pastry in my hand as if it were a live grenade. The color rapidly drained from her face. She did not know what was inside that tart. She had simply handed a stolen water-damaged notebook to a stranger and demanded they replicate it. The silence in the room stretched out, becoming incredibly heavy and suffocating. 500 people, including the mayor, the local press, and Julian's entire executive board, were staring directly at her. My mother stepped forward, her face tight with sudden anxiety, but she could not intervene without making Jada look like a complete fraud. Jada was trapped. Her entire identity was built on maintaining her flawless public image. To refuse the bite would be to admit she was lying in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. Her hand trembled violently as she reached out and took the tart. She glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. She opened her mouth and took a small, hesitant bite. She chewed. She swallowed. She forced a rigid, terrified smile and turned to the crowd, preparing to accept their applause. But I did not step away. I kept the microphone raised. "It really is an absolute marvel of culinary science," I announced, watching Jada's face intently. "The most difficult part of that specific glaze is achieving the glossy finish without making it too sweet. But I solved that problem years ago. The secret is the binding agent. You have to use a very specific cold-pressed oil to emulsify the sugar." Jada stopped smiling. She swallowed hard, her hand flying up to touch the base of her throat. "Yes," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, chilling whisper that echoed through the silent room. "Pure, unrefined macadamia oil." The silver dessert fork clattered loudly onto the marble floor. Jada was deathly allergic to macadamia nuts. It was not a mild sensitivity, it was a severe, violent allergy that we had known about since childhood. Within seconds, the reaction was absolute and undeniable. Jada let out a sharp, wheezing gasp, clawing at the high neckline of her custom white silk gown. Bright, angry red hives immediately erupted across her chest and began spreading rapidly up her neck. Her perfectly contoured face began to swell, her lips puffing out grotesquely as her airway began to constrict. "Oh my God," my mother screamed, completely abandoning her regal composure. She lunged forward, grabbing Jada as my sister stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of champagne glasses. "Somebody help her! She cannot breathe. She is having an allergic reaction." The grand atrium descended into absolute chaotic panic. Wealthy guests scrambled backward, shouting for a doctor. The event coordinators began sprinting frantically toward the emergency exits to flag down the paramedics who were heavily stationed outside for the massive event. I stood perfectly still in my emerald gown, holding the microphone, watching the golden child completely unravel in front of the entire city. She had stolen my work to humiliate me, and in doing so, she had poisoned herself with her own profound ignorance. Jada collapsed onto the marble floor, a messy, wheezing heap of ruined white silk and angry red hives. The flawless, untouchable aesthetic she had spent her entire life cultivating was completely destroyed in less than 60 seconds. Two paramedics carrying heavy medical bags burst through the crowd, dropping to their knees beside her and immediately preparing an epinephrine injection. Through the sheer chaos, heavy footsteps approached the spotlight. Julian stopped right beside me. He looked down at the pathetic, gasping woman on the floor. And then he looked at my mother, who was weeping hysterically with her mascara running down her face. Julian did not look concerned. He looked entirely disgusted. He reached over and gently took the microphone from my hand. He stepped to the very edge of the spotlight, ensuring he had the undivided attention of the entire room, even over the sound of the paramedics working. "May I have your attention?" Julian commanded. His deep voice cut through the panic like a blade. The room fell terrifyingly quiet, save for Jada's ragged breathing. "What you just witnessed was not a tragic accident," Julian announced loudly, his eyes sweeping across the sea of shocked socialites and journalists. "You just witnessed the result of a massive, pathetic lie. Jada did not bake this dessert. She stole the proprietary recipe from her own sister." My mother looked up from the floor, her face pale with absolute horror. "Julian, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Not here, not in front of everyone." Julian ignored her completely. He turned his intense gaze directly onto the cameras that were still rolling in the back of the room. "Jada has lied to me since the day we met. She stole credit for saving my life in a car accident. She stole her sister's intellectual property. She is a fraud, and this entire family is an absolute disgrace." He looked back down at Jada, who was currently receiving an oxygen mask from the paramedics, her face swollen beyond recognition. "The engagement is officially permanently cancelled." Julian declared, his words echoing off the glass dome with devastating finality. "There will be no wedding. My corporate legal team will be filing a massive civil lawsuit against Loretta's Patisserie for corporate espionage and intellectual property theft first thing tomorrow morning. I suggest nobody in this room ever does business with this family again." Julian lowered the microphone and set it carefully onto the white velvet table. He turned to me, offering his arm with impeccable gentlemanly grace. "Shall we go, Maya?" he asked quietly. I looked at my mother kneeling on the floor in the wreckage of her social empire. I looked at Jada, humiliated, swollen, and stripped of her billionaire prize. I did not feel an ounce of pity. They had tried to bury me in the dark entirely, forgetting that I was the one who knew how to plant the seeds. I took Julian's arm. "We are finished here," I replied. We turned our backs on the screaming, chaotic mess of my family and walked slowly and deliberately out of the grand atrium. The crowd parted for us in absolute stunned silence. We stepped out of the botanical garden and into the cool, refreshing Atlanta night air, leaving the toxic illusion of my past permanently behind us. The morning after the gala, the city of Atlanta woke up to a complete media earthquake. My phone started vibrating against my nightstand at 6 in the morning, and it did not stop for hours. The local society blogs and business journals were absolutely flooded with leaked smartphone footage from the botanical garden. The video of Jada collapsing in her white ball gown, her face swollen and covered in hives from her own stolen recipe, was going universally viral. But the headline that dominated the financial news networks was Julian taking the microphone and publicly severing his billionaire empire from my family. I sat at the breakfast island in my apartment, sipping a cup of dark roast coffee, watching the pristine financial dashboard of Onyx Hospitality update in real time. My sales had tripled overnight. The wealthy elite of the city, desperate to distance themselves from the scandalous ruin of Loretta's Patisserie, were flooding my encrypted website with massive corporate orders. I had won. But for my brother Trey, the nightmare was just beginning. Trey had built his entire identity around the illusion of being a visionary tech entrepreneur. But his startup was a hollow shell propped up entirely by a massive seed investment from a prestigious Atlanta venture capital firm. What Trey did not know, and what Julian had kept quietly to himself, was that Julian's hospitality conglomerate was the primary shadow backer of that exact venture capital firm. Julian owned the very financial foundation my brother was standing on. At exactly 9 in the morning, Julian executed his threat with absolute ruthless precision. He did not call Trey. He did not issue a warning. Julian simply instructed his asset management team to pull their entire funding portfolio out of the venture capital firm, backing my brother, citing a severe breach of ethical confidence. The domino effect was instantaneous and completely catastrophic. Panic swept through the investment board. Within an hour, the venture capitalists initiated an aggressive emergency audit on Trey's startup. They looked into the company ledgers and discovered the horrifying truth. Trey had not just failed to build a software prototype. He had completely drained the corporate accounts to pay for Chloe's $250,000 bail bond. He had used investor money to cover his personal legal fees and fund his luxury lifestyle. By noon, the venture capital firm filed an emergency injunction against him for gross corporate fraud and embezzlement. They immediately froze all of his personal and business bank accounts. The commercial real estate firm that owned the lease to the bakery he had stolen from me was notified that Trey's financial backing had evaporated. Because he had missed his first massive rent payment to the building owner, they did not give him a grace period. They sent a private security team to Peachtree Street, changed the locks on the glass doors, and officially seized all the expensive equipment inside to cover his outstanding debt. Trey lost the stolen bakery, his company, and his entire future in the span of 3 hours. He was completely ruined. He was facing federal embezzlement charges, massive debt, and public humiliation. With his bank accounts frozen and his credit cards declining, his leased luxury sports car was aggressively repossessed directly from the driveway of his sprawling suburban home. He had nowhere left to turn, so he did exactly what he had always done when he destroyed his own life. He ran crying back to our mother. Trey secured a cheap rideshare and arrived at the family mansion in the late afternoon. He walked through the heavy oak front doors, expecting to find comfort, expecting Loretta to write a magical check to save him. Instead, he walked into a war zone. Chloe was standing in the grand foyer of the mansion. She was not offering her husband a shoulder to cry on. She was standing next to 4 massive expensive leather suitcases, wearing designer sunglasses indoors, tapping her foot impatiently on the marble floor. When Trey walked in, sweating, pale, and trembling, Chloe did not even flinch. She simply looked at him with profound, icy disgust. "What are you doing?" Trey asked, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Why are your bags packed? My accounts are completely frozen. The investors are pressing criminal charges. I need your uncle to call the judge. I need your family to bail me out." Chloe let out a sharp, venomous laugh that echoed off the high ceilings of the foyer. "My family is not bailing you out, Trey. You are completely bankrupt. You are a fraud, and I am filing for divorce." Trey stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck. "You cannot leave me," he pleaded, his face crumpling. "We are a team. We are going to build generational wealth." Chloe snatched her expensive purse from the entryway table. "We are not a team. I married a rising tech CEO with a pristine social pedigree. I did not marry a pathetic broke loser who has to steal from his own sister to pretend he has a business." "You have absolutely nothing left, Trey. You do not even have a car. You expect me to stay here and go to prison with you for financial fraud. You are completely delusional." My mother, hearing the shouting, hurried out of the formal living room. Loretta looked entirely haggard. She had spent the entire night at the hospital watching doctors pump Jada full of steroids, and she was currently watching her catering business completely disintegrate on the local news. "Chloe, you cannot speak to my son this way," Loretta demanded, trying to summon her usual matriarchal authority. "You are his wife. You made a vow to this family." Chloe slowly turned her gaze to my mother. The progressive polite ally mask was entirely gone, replaced by the vicious self-serving predator she truly was. "Do not lecture me about vows," Chloe snapped, her voice dripping with absolute contempt. "Look at your family. Your precious golden daughter is the laughingstock of the entire state, currently lying in a hospital bed with a ruined face. Your son is facing federal prison, and you. You are nothing but an aging narcissist playing dress-up in a mansion you can no longer afford." Loretta gasped, placing a hand over her chest in pure shock. "You drove away the only person in this family who actually worked for a living." Chloe continued her words, acting like a barrage of sharp knives. "Maya paid for this lifestyle. Maya kept you afloat. You were so busy trying to destroy her because you were jealous of her talent that you completely torpedoed your own ship. You are broke, Loretta. And I am not going down with you." The heavy horn of a private black car honked outside the front door. Chloe's wealthy uncle had sent a driver for her. She did not look back at Trey, who had dropped to his knees on the marble floor, weeping into his hands. She simply signaled the driver to grab her luggage, walked out the front doors, and disappeared. abandoning my brother to face the brutal consequences of his actions entirely alone. But the universe was not finished balancing the scales. While Trey was sobbing in the foyer of the family mansion, my mother was about to face a reckoning of her own. Loretta had run her luxury catering business for years on a foundation of absolute financial deception. She had continuously claimed my grueling labor as massive overhead expenses, filed fraudulent deductions, and deliberately misreported the company's sheer profit margins to fund Jada's expensive pageant coaches and designer wardrobes. As long as the cash was flowing in from wealthy clients, the local tax authorities had not paid close attention. But losing Julian's contract and facing a massive wave of immediate client cancellations triggered an automatic financial red flag in the state banking system. When Loretta tried to move funds to cover Jada's mounting emergency medical bills and Trey's massive defaulted loans, her business accounts flagged for severe insufficient funds. The Internal Revenue Service does not care about high society pedigree. They do not care about country club memberships or church board connections. They care about a decade of unpaid federal taxes and deliberate corporate fraud. 2 days after the gala, a fleet of dark government vehicles pulled up to the commercial headquarters of Loretta's Patisserie. A team of federal agents wearing sharp windbreakers and carrying heavy plastic bins marched directly through the front doors. They did not ask for a meeting. They presented a federal warrant, ordered the remaining staff to immediately vacate the premises, and began systematically confiscating every single computer filing cabinet and accounting ledger in the building. They placed heavy steel padlocks on the front doors. They taped bright orange federal seizure notices across the large glass windows visible to the entire street. The legacy my mother had prized above all else, the company she had used as a weapon to control me, was permanently seized by the federal government. She had spent her entire life curating an image of flawless wealth and untouchable grace, treating me like the embarrassing stain on her perfect canvas. But without my relentless work ethic silently holding the foundation together, her entire empire collapsed into dust in less than 48 hours. I watched the news report of the federal raid on the television mounted in the corner of my gleaming massive West Midtown ghost kitchen. My prep cooks were busy boxing hundreds of flawless pastries for delivery. The smell of rich vanilla and roasting pecans filled the air. I looked at the screen watching the federal agents carry boxes of evidence out of my mother's building, and I felt a profound, absolute sense of peace. I turned off the television, tied my apron a little tighter, and got back to work. The storm rolled into West Midtown with a violent, deafening crash of thunder, unleashing a torrential downpour that hammered against the high skylights of my warehouse. It was past 10 at night. My prep cooks had already finished the evening shift and gone home, leaving me alone in the gleaming, sterile quiet of the massive commercial kitchen. I was standing at the central stainless steel island, reviewing the final logistics for our national shipping expansion, when the heavy security buzzer at the loading dock blared through the silence. I did not have any late deliveries scheduled. I walked over to the security monitor mounted on the brick wall and tapped the screen to access the exterior camera feed. Standing on the concrete ramp, completely drenched by the freezing rain, was my mother. She did not look like the untouchable high society matriarch who had commanded the Botanical Garden Gala just 2 weeks ago. Her expensive designer trench coat was soaked through, clinging heavily to her frame. Her perfectly styled hair was plastered to the sides of her face, and her makeup was completely washed away, revealing the deep, exhausted lines of a woman whose entire fraudulent empire had just collapsed. She looked pathetic, but as I watched her raise her fist and violently pound on the heavy steel door again, I knew she had not come here to apologize. I walked over and unbolted the heavy deadbolt, pulling the steel door open. The freezing wind immediately whipped into the warm kitchen. Loretta pushed past me without a single word of greeting. She marched into the center of my multi-million-dollar facility, dripping rainwater all over my pristine, polished concrete floors. She looked around at the towering convection ovens, the massive walk-in refrigerators, and the stacks of luxury packaging. I saw her jaw tighten. Even now, completely ruined and facing federal tax charges, she could barely stomach the physical reality of my massive success. "You need to sell this building," my mother demanded. Her voice was not shaking. It was sharp, entitled, and completely devoid of any maternal warmth. She turned to face me, crossing her arms over her soaked chest. I calmly closed the heavy steel door, locking the deadbolt behind me. I walked over to the prep table and picked up a clean linen towel, tossing it onto the counter near her. I am not selling my business, Mother. What are you doing here in the middle of the night? Loretta ignored the towel. She stepped closer, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. You do not understand, Maya. The IRS seized everything. They froze the business accounts, they locked the doors of the patisserie, and they placed a massive federal tax lien on my personal assets. The bank initiated emergency foreclosure proceedings on the family mansion this morning. They are putting the house up for public auction by the end of the month. I am going to lose my home. She pointed a shaking finger at the high vaulted ceiling of my warehouse. This property is worth at least $4 million in the current market. If you liquidate this asset immediately, we will have enough liquid cash to pay off the federal tax liens, settle Trey's legal fees, and save the family mansion from the auction block. You can move your little bakery operation into a smaller, cheaper commercial space. We need this money, Maya. You owe this to your family. I stared at her. The absolute staggering audacity of her demand echoed in the quiet kitchen. She had spent my entire life stealing from me, belittling me, and trying to destroy my reputation. Just 2 weeks ago, she had sent a mass email trying to publicly ruin my sanity and starve my business to death. And now, standing in the ruins of her own making, she expected me to set my empire on fire just to keep her warm. I do not owe you a single dime, I said, my voice dangerously low and steady. You lost your business because you committed federal tax fraud to pay for Jada's pageant coaches and Trey's failed startups. You gambled with your own legacy and you lost. Loretta's face twisted into an ugly, vicious sneer. How dare you speak to me like that? I am your mother. If it were not for me, you would have absolutely nothing. I put a roof over your head. I paid your father's staggering medical bills after he died. I sacrificed my entire life to keep this family afloat, and you are going to stand there in your expensive kitchen and watch me lose my home. The mention of my father's medical bills was the absolute final straw. The cold, burning clarity I had found in the bank vault weeks ago surged through my veins. I did not yell. I simply reached into the deep pocket of my chef coat and pulled out the small folded handwritten letter I had retrieved from the safety deposit box. I held it up in the bright fluorescent light. Do you know what this is, Mother? I asked softly. Loretta squinted at the paper, her brow furrowing in confusion. This is a letter from my father, I stated, watching the color rapidly drain from her face. He wrote it in the hospice bed right before he died. He left it inside a safety deposit box at First Atlanta Bank, alongside the ironclad commercial deed to this exact warehouse. Loretta took a physical step backward, her eyes darting frantically to the letter. You are lying. That deposit box was seized by the bank to cover his debts. There were no debts, I countered, my voice cracking like a whip. He did not leave us in financial ruin. You drained the primary family accounts yourself. You lied to me for 15 years, telling me we were drowning in debt so you could trap me in your kitchen. You forced me to work 80-hour weeks for free, convincing me I was paying off a debt to my dead father, while you funneled every single cent of my profit directly into Jada's bank account. You stole my youth, you stole my labor, and you tried to steal my future. Loretta opened her mouth to argue, to spin another brilliant, manipulative lie, but the words completely died in her throat. She looked at the letter in my hand and realized that her ultimate secret was completely exposed. There was nowhere left to hide. But I am not going to let you lose the family mansion to the bank, I said smoothly, walking over to my small, glass-walled office in the corner of the kitchen. Loretta's expression shifted from terror to a sudden, desperate flare of hope. She genuinely believed I was folding. She genuinely believed that her lifelong conditioning had finally kicked in, forcing the dutiful, abused daughter to save her one last time. Maya, I knew you would do the right thing, she gasped, following me to the office door. I opened the top drawer of my heavy oak desk. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, crisp stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue seal. I walked back out of the office and slapped the heavy stack of papers squarely onto the stainless steel island right in front of her. You should really pay closer attention to the county foreclosure schedules, Mother, I said, tapping the blue seal with my index finger. The bank did not schedule the auction for the end of the month. They expedited the process to recover their massive losses. The public auction took place at 9 o'clock this morning. Loretta stared at the documents, her hands trembling so violently she could barely lift them. She carefully peeled back the cover page. I bought it, I whispered, leaning forward so I was looking directly into her horrified eyes. My blind corporate LLC Onyx Hospitality purchased the estate outright for pennies on the dollar. I paid in cash. There is no mortgage, there is no bank holding the title. I stood up perfectly straight, looking down at the woman who had tormented me for 35 years. I own the mansion now, Loretta. The deed is entirely in my name, and as the sole legal property owner, I am officially issuing your eviction notice. You and Trey have exactly 48 hours to pack whatever cheap belongings the IRS did not seize and get out of my house. Loretta let out a guttural, shattered sob. She collapsed against the stainless steel table, burying her face in her hands, weeping with the absolute crushing realization that she had lost everything to the daughter she had always treated like dirt. I did not comfort her. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. I walked over to the heavy steel loading door, pulled it wide open to the freezing rain, and waited in absolute silence until she finally gathered the last shred of her broken pride and walked out into the storm. 6 months later, the spring sun was shining brilliantly over the bustling streets of downtown Atlanta. The air was crisp, carrying the vibrant energy of the city, but the sidewalk in front of my new building smelled exclusively of rich dark chocolate and brown butter. I stood on the sidewalk holding a pair of massive golden scissors, looking up at the towering glass and steel facade of the new Onyx Hospitality flagship storefront. I had completely moved my operation out of the secret West Midtown warehouse and stepped directly into the light. The exterior was painted a sleek, elegant matte black with massive floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing the gleaming state-of-the-art open kitchen inside. A line of eager, wealthy customers already stretched entirely around the city block, waiting for the doors to officially open. I was not hiding in the back room anymore. I was wearing a pristine, short-sleeved white chef coat with my name meticulously embroidered in gold thread over my heart. My forearms were completely bare. The severe caramel burns from 6 months ago had fully healed into thick silver bands of keloid scar tissue that wrapped around my skin like twisted armor. I did not wear long sleeves to cover them. I did not apply heavy makeup to hide them. They were the physical proof of my survival, the permanent badges of the fire I had walked through to build my empire. Standing immediately to my right, looking incredibly sharp in a tailored navy suit, was Julian. He was not there as my savior. He was not there as a billionaire protecting a helpless victim. He was standing beside me as my exclusive corporate partner and my absolute equal. Over the last 6 months, our strictly business relationship had evolved into a deeply profound, unbreakable bond built on mutual respect, shared ambition, and relentless honesty. We challenged each other in the boardroom, we trusted each other completely, and the way he looked at me right now with pure, unfiltered admiration made my heart beat a little faster. "Are you ready to make history?" Maya Julian asked quietly, leaning in, so only I could hear him over the cheering crowd. "I am just getting started," I replied with a confident smile. I raised the golden scissors and sliced cleanly through the thick black velvet ribbon blocking the front doors. The crowd erupted into massive applause. The flashbulbs of the local culinary press popped brilliantly, capturing the exact moment I officially claimed my place as the reigning culinary queen of Atlanta. As the doors swung open and the excited crowd began flooding into the elegant retail space, I stepped back to take in the sheer magnitude of the moment. I looked through the massive glass windows of my bakery, watching the reflection of the bustling city traffic. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a subtle movement on the opposite side of the busy street. Walking slowly down the dirty concrete sidewalk, getting aggressively shoved aside by fast-walking commuters, were Jada and Trey. They were completely unrecognizable. Jada was not wearing custom silk or sparkling diamonds. Her hair was pulled back into a messy, unwashed knot, and she was wearing a faded, cheap tracksuit. The severe allergic reaction from the gala had permanently damaged the flawless, pristine aesthetic she had worshipped her entire life, leaving her face looking tired and deeply aged. Trey was walking beside her, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and scuffed sneakers. They were each carrying heavy, battered cardboard boxes filled with the last meager scraps of their personal belongings. The venture capital firm had completely bankrupted Trey, and the federal courts had stripped my mother of every single asset she possessed. They had been forcefully evicted from my mansion exactly 48 hours after Loretta showed up at my warehouse. Without their wealth, their massive social influence, and their fake progressive masks, the elite society of Atlanta had completely abandoned them. They were absolute pariahs forced to move into a tiny rundown apartment on the absolute outskirts of the city, entirely dependent on minimum wage jobs they had spent their entire lives mocking. I watched them struggle down the street, arguing bitterly with each other over who was going to carry the heavier box. They did not look across the street. They did not see me standing in front of my massive, gleaming empire. They were entirely consumed by their own miserable, toxic reality. I did not feel the urge to call out to them. I did not feel the need to cross the street and gloat over their absolute ruin. The intense burning anger that had fueled my initial revenge was completely gone, replaced by a profound, unshakable peace. They were simply strangers to me now. The heavy, suffocating chains of my toxic family were permanently broken, left behind in the ashes of the fake life they had tried to force upon me. I turned my back on the street, completely cutting them out of my vision and my life forever. I walked into the bustling, beautifully lit interior of the Onyx flagship store. The air was filled with the sound of ringing registers, happy customers, and the rhythmic hum of the massive espresso machines. Julian was standing near the front display case, talking with a prominent food critic, but his eyes immediately found mine as I walked in. He offered me a warm, genuine smile that reached all the way to his eyes. I walked over to the pristine marble counter, reached into the display case, and picked up a single, perfectly baked signature soul crust tart. The delicate pastry shattered flawlessly. As I took a bite, the rich, spiced filling melting perfectly on my tongue. It tasted like absolute freedom. I stood in the center of the massive empire I had built, with my own two hands surrounded by the beautiful life I had fought so fiercely to claim, and I smiled. The greatest lesson I learned from this journey is that your true worth is never defined by family members who continuously try to tear you down. For years, I allowed my mother and siblings to weaponize my loyalty, confusing their abuse with love. But genuine power comes from realizing you do not need their validation to succeed. When toxic people try to push you into the shadows, use that exact darkness to quietly build your strength. The ultimate revenge is not screaming or causing a scene. It is simply choosing yourself, cutting the toxic ties, and living a beautifully successful life. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic family to protect your own peace, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own story of resilience in the comments below.